Anime autopsy here, and I need you to stop for a second and actually think about something you have not questioned since you were 6 years old. Earth has one moon. Period. End of sentence. That is the sky you were handed in school, in documentaries, in every lazy space graphic where there is a blue marble and a single grey golf ball doing laps around it. And listen to me, this is not a sin. This is fine. This is normal. Every single week you were told there is one moon, you saw one moon, and unless you are the kind of pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast and Martian cities in JPEG compression, why would you ever suspect there used to be more? The story feels complete. The picture looks finished. Except here's the thing. That picture, the calm, tidy, one moon forever night sky, there is a growing pile of work, from respectable orbital mechanics papers all the way down to forums that have never seen a spell checker that keeps whispering the same uncomfortable possibility, not metaphorically, literally missing moons. Temporary captured satellites, broken fragments, second companions that shape tides and climates, and then either crashed, merged, or were flung away. On paper, this should be an amazing storytelling playground. You have tidal rhythmites in ancient rocks hinting that the Earth-Moon dance has not always been this slow waltz. You have quasi-satellites, weird objects such as 3753 Krulina, already doing fake moon orbits around us. You have crater chains and doublet impact basins that some authors argue look suspiciously intentional, as if multiple bodies were hanging around causing trouble. But go into the community conversation, and it is a disaster. One category of fans sees the phrase multiple moons theory and immediately starts dunking on it as tinfoil nonsense. Screenshot the wildest tweet in the thread, slap a clown emoji on it, and call it a day. No reading, no nuance, just pure reflex skepticism, because anything that smells fringe must be a conspiracy. Then you have the other side, the true believers who will post a blurry photo of a crater chain next to an ancient myth about two suns and declare, with zero hesitation, that this proves a lost satellite exploded in 10,500 BCE. Number math, number orbital modeling. Just vibes and a YouTube thumbnail with red arrows. Both groups have lost the plot. The hardcore skeptics flatten everything into nonsense. The hardcore believers turn an actually interesting problem into a lore dump. And in the middle is this serious question. Did we erase a huge part of Earth's story by assuming one moon forever? I say this as someone who has spent an embarrassing amount of time reading capture and merge simulations, fossil day-length data, and yes, some truly cursed forums trying to sort signal from noise. So we need to have a long, slightly obsessive conversation. Not to prove a secret NASA cover-up, not to crown some crank as the author of Ultimate Truth, but to ask whether our one moon full stop assumption has been quietly foreshadowing a blind spot in how we write the history of our own sky. So here's what we're actually doing for the next 2 hours, because I need you to know what you've signed up for. This is not a throw some AI art of 3 moons over pyramids and whisper what if situation. This is a forensic case file on the sky. Long, messy, fully annotated, the kind of thing where you could pause, screenshot and yell at me in the comments with timestamps. Yes, it's 2+ hours. Yes, that's intentional. I'm not going to speedrun 4 billion years of orbital mechanics, ancient religion and geological weirdness in 18 minutes and a spooky thumbnail. If we're going to touch the multiple moons conversation without turning into a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast every time a myth mentions 2 lights in the sky, we need to slow down and define terms. Here's the thing. If we don't decide what counts as real evidence, plausible speculation, and pure story time, the whole topic collapses into vibes. One person is waving capture and merge simulations and tidal rhythmites. Another person is waving a flood myth and a grainy stone carving. The community mashes it all into one big proof thread, and suddenly you can't tell the difference between solid physics and a fanfic about a jealous second moon. So the high-level thesis is very simple. Earth's history probably did involve more complex satellite dynamics than the one moon classroom diagram suggests. Temporary second moons, quasi-satellites, weird resonant orbits, that stuff is already in the literature. But most popular lost moon claims are a chaotic blend of 3 categories: mainstream astrophysics, retrofitted interpretations of old data. The problem is that fans keep calling all three evidence with the same straight face. In this video, I'm going to be obnoxiously systematic. We're going through historical astronomy, from early telescopic observations to modern capture models. We're going into ancient myths and religions, where two suns, two moons motifs show up in Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica, Polynesia. We're hitting geological and fossil records, where day-length data and impact basins are used to argue for past satellite captures and breakups. We're checking orbital mechanics, tidal forces, rotational wobbles, and modern quasi-satellites like 3753 Crune as concrete examples. Every single piece gets tagged, mainstream supported, plausible but fringe, or straight-up narrative flourish. This is not a sin. Retrofitting stories onto rocks is how humans do storytelling. This is normal. The problem is when an author in a forum thread presents a mythic story as if it's a peer-reviewed paper, and then calls anyone who disagrees a shill. Tone-wise, I'm going to be combative toward lazy arguments on both sides. If a skeptic hand waves every anomaly with random chance and zero math, I'm coming for that. If a believer says ancient people all drew two moons, checkmate, with no dating, no context, no orbital constraints, I'm coming for that too. But I'm affectionate toward you, the person who actually sits through the receipts. You're the one willing to ask, what was intentional, what was retrofitted, and what was never more than a story told under a very different sky. And once we've built that three-part model, we're going to stress test it on the weirdest claims in this whole multiple moon saga. So here's where we stop spiritually free climbing and actually put some holds on the wall. I need you to have a framework in your head, because otherwise every crater, every myth, every weird NASA PDF starts to feel equally persuasive, and then we're just a community of pattern-seeking monkeys seeing Jesus in every piece of lunar toast. Bucket 1 is evidence, capital E. This is the stuff you can in principle measure. Tidal rhythmites in ancient rock that tell you the day used to be shorter and the moon used to be closer. Orbital simulations where you throw a second captured moonlet into the Earth-Moon system and watch it spiral in and merge. Multi-ring impact basins and doublet craters that match what happens when multiple orbiting bodies occasionally whiff their turn and faceplant. You don't have to agree with the lost satellite interpretation, but the data itself is testable, quantifiable, and taken seriously by actual astrophysicists and geologists. In story terms, this is Chekhov's gun that really is on the mantle from page 1. The author put it there on purpose. You can argue about what scene it pays off in, but you cannot argue that the gun exists. Bucket 2 is retrofitting. And listen to me, this is not a sin. This is normal. Retrofitting is when you grab ambiguous material and hang a multiple moons narrative on it after the fact, because it feels satisfying. You see a certain crater pattern and say, clearly this was our second moon shattering in low orbit. You read a flood myth that talks about twin lights in the sky and decide those must be dual satellites in resonance, even though the text never says moons and the dating is fuzzy at best. The data here is real, but the specific lost moon explanation is optional DLC, installed because fans of a theory want it to be true. In Chekhov terms, this is when the author notices a random vase on the mantle in chapter 10 and decides, very heroically, that it was a gun all along. The object was there, the meaning was not planned. Bucket 3 is mythcraft. This is where writing and cosmology fully cross the streams. Mythcraft is when cultures tell stories about extra suns, shattered moons, sky serpents eating the light, and we mine those tales as if they are literal observational logs. And some of that material absolutely encodes real events. Eclipses, impacts, volcanic winters. Some of it is psychological horror or political propaganda or just really good storytelling. When a Mesoamerican myth talks about multiple failed suns before the current age, that's incredible narrative world building. It is not a peer-reviewed paper on transient lunar captures. Here, Chekhov's gun isn't on the mantle at all. The gun exists only in the fandom wiki. Beautiful fan art, zero prop. And here's the thing. Retrofitting and mythcraft are not sins here. This is fine. This is how humans handle a terrifying sky. The problem is when we stop labeling the buckets, when mythcraft gets smuggled in as evidence, when a cool retrofit gets quoted as if it was always intentional geology, we lose the ability to tell which scars in Earth's story are real and which are narrative. So, as we go through specific claims, extra moons, broken moons, moons that dip too low, we're going to keep asking, which bucket is this actually in? So when I say which bucket is this actually in, I'm not just being pedantic for fun. I'm asking a deeper question. What would a non-myth-crafted, actually physics-based Earth-Moon story even look like over 4.5 billion years? Because if your mental image is a clean diagram with one moon in a perfect circle forever, listen to me, that's the fan fiction, not the multiple moons. Here's the thing, mainstream science is already way weirder than the tidy textbook version you met in school. The leading model, the giant impact hypothesis, is basically cosmic vehicular manslaughter. Early Earth gets T-boned by a Mars-sized body we call Theia. The collision vaporizes rock, launches a disk of molten debris around the planet, and out of that screaming incandescent shrapnel, material accretes into one dominant moon, not peacefully, not slowly. In a few years to a few centuries of absolute orbital chaos. In those early simulations, you don't just get a single marble gently swirling around a blue sphere. You get clumps, arcs, half-built moons forming and remerging. You get orbits that are stretched, precessing, decaying. The young moon used to be way closer. The day was way shorter. The tides were insane. If an author wrote a world with that much turbulence and then told you the satellite situation stabilized instantly and stayed pristine for billions of years, you'd call that bad writing. And that mess never really stops. Celestial mechanics over geological time is not a clock. It's a bar fight in slow motion. The sun is pulling, Jupiter is bullying, passing asteroids are doing drive-bys. Captures, near misses, and temporary satellites aren't fringe. They're baked into end-body gravity. We already see this in practice. Earth has had mini-moons, such as 2006 or H120, briefly captured looping a few times before drifting off. It's not a myth. That's measured. Then you have the weirdos. Quasi-satellites. Objects in a 1-1 resonance with Earth that dance around the sun, but from our perspective trace these cursed pretzel-shaped paths. 3753 Crutha is the poster child. It's not a moon in the strict category, but functionally it's doing this off-brand moon cosplay, staying in step with Earth's orbit for thousands of years. If you're a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast, this is the universe handing you a whole breakfast platter of weirder orbital relationships than one neat circle. So when fans insist that a permanently single moon Earth is the default, that's the problem. Over billions of years, trying to plan a perfectly stable one-moon system is the gravitational equivalent of trying to pre-write a 1000 chapter manga with 0 retcons, 0 new characters, 0 editorial interference. The universe doesn't care about our tidy storytelling. It cares about conservation laws and whoever wandered too close at the wrong time, which means we need to flip the burden of proof. Given how chaotic orbital histories are, the bold claim isn't Earth might have had extra captured or transient satellites that later crashed or escaped. The bold claim is, nope, just one, forever. Nothing to see here. And if that's the hill you want to die on, I need you to see what that does to the next set of scars we're going to look at. Because once we stop demanding perfect cosmic planning, some very specific craters, tides and myths start reading a lot less random than you've been told. So we need to slow down for a second and ask a very unsexy question. What would actually count as a real lost moon clue and not just, ooh, big crater, spooky thumbnail? Because if everything is evidence, nothing is. Here's the thing. A serious lost satellite candidate has to clear 3 hurdles. First, it has to be physically consistent with orbital mechanics. The trajectory, the energy, the scale of damage all have to match something that could have been an actual captured moon, not a random space rock on a one-way trip, as it has to be nailed to a plausible era in Earth-Moon history. You can't just wave at deep time and call it a day. The timing has to line up with when an extra body could survive without instantly destabilizing the system. Third, it has to be harder to explain with the boring models. Single moon tides, standard asteroid impacts, regular tectonics. That third one is non-negotiable. If the mystery feature collapses the second you say, probably an asteroid, it's not a lost moon, it's fan fiction. So let me give you an example of what would actually move the needle. Imagine we map a chain of enormous impact basins across one hemisphere of Earth, and buried inside the melt sheets we keep finding the same weird chemical fingerprint, the same isotopic ratios over and over. Then we date them and realize they're not random in time either. They're spaced out over a few million years in a way that matches a big body slowly spiraling inward, grazing the atmosphere, shedding debris, hitting in a predictable pattern. That's a story. That's a body in a decaying orbit. This crater is big, therefore second moon is noise. A coherent chain with matching composition and timing, that starts to look intentional in the astrophysical sense. Now, zoom out from craters to tides. We actually have tidal rhythmites and fossil day length records that track the Earth-Moon distance over hundreds of millions of years. Layered sediments recording ancient tidal cycles, coral growth rings showing more days per year because the planet was spinning faster. These are receipts. They already let you reconstruct a smooth curve of the moon drifting away. So what would a lost moon do to that? You'd expect anomalies, intervals where the day length or tidal period jumps off the predicted curve or beats in the pattern that scream extra tidal source and then vanish. If the rhythmites say 2 strong tidal frequencies for 10 million years and then suddenly drop back to 1, now we're talking. And listen to me, this is where the community always wants to cheat with myths. A story about a shattered second moon, a flood, a long night. This is fine, this is normal. Humans are pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast. Of course we mythologize the sky. But a myth only promotes itself into the evidence category if it lines up with independent stuff, a layer of impact spherules in the rock column from the same window, a climate shift, maybe even those tidal anomalies pointing to a transient satellite. If it doesn't survive that filter, it goes straight into retrofitting and mythcraft, no matter how poetic the tale or how dramatic the YouTube thumbnail. I need you to hold that line with me, because in the next section we're going to take some of the loudest proofs you've seen thrown around and run them through this exact shredder to see what's left. So here's where this gets messy. Because once you've heard, Earth used to have a whole squad of moons and they died tragically, you cannot unhear it. Suddenly, every crater, every myth, every weird stone circle is standing in your doorway, going, hey, what if I was about that? You need to put a sharper edge on this. Retrofitting in this context is when we take something that was not originally about multiple moons, an impact basin, a flood myth, a temple alignment, and we assign it that meaning after the fact because we've already fallen in love with the lost satellite story. The data didn't change, our category did. The crater was just a crater until you saw a YouTube thumbnail about twin moons and now it's obvious foreshadowing of a decaying satellite. Concrete example. You'll see people screenshotting every double crater on the moon and going, checkmate, NASA, that's clearly a binary moon system imprint. No orbital modelling, no dating, no attempt to see if a single rubble pile impactor could do the same thing. Just 2 circles equals 2 moons, or every culture that has a flood myth, instantly upgraded to hidden record of tidal chaos from a captured moon spiraling in, without checking whether the supposed event lines up with known impacts, or with the actual sea level record, or with basic geology. Listen to me, this is not a call-out, this is not a sin. This is storytelling brain doing what storytelling brain does. Humans are pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast and foreshadowing in grocery lists. We are built to treat coincidence as conspiracy because the cost of missing a real pattern used to be you get eaten. So of course, when you hand that brain a romantic narrative about murder moons, it starts speedrunning the archives and slapping that label on everything. This is fine. This is normal. I do it. You do it. I watch a simulation of a temporary second moon in a capture and merge model, and suddenly I'm mentally re-tagging half the tidal rhythmites on Earth as possible moon drama, even though I know better. The problem isn't the impulse. The problem is when we stop distinguishing between this is a fun retrofit and this is actual evidence that would survive contact with a bored grad student holding a spreadsheet. Because here's the thing, when we overcredit retrofits, We hand serious researchers the easiest possible excuse to dismiss the whole topic. If every doublet crater, every two suns, two moons myth motif, every megalith that happens to see the moon at some angle gets waved around as proof, the entire multiple moons conversation collapses into crankbait. Any legitimate questions about temporary moons, quasi-satellites, or real capture events get buried under a junk drawer of bad examples. I need you to do something with me for the rest of this video. I'm going to keep slapping labels on what we talk about. Evidence, retrofit, mythcraft. When we look at a Polynesian story about a vanished second light in the sky, we're going to say what it is. When we talk about an orbital resonance that actually works on paper, we're going to say what that is too. The goal is that satisfying click of classification in your head, instead of a vague mush of maybe. Pattern interrupt. At the end of this, I don't care whether you walk away believing in lost satellites. I care that you can point to a claim and say, with your chest, which bucket it lives in. And to practice that, in the next section, we're going to grab some of the loudest proofs you've seen. Double craters, flood legends, weird wobbles, and we're going to start sorting. So before we start throwing specific craters and flood layers at each other, we need to talk about stories. Because if you go straight from double impact basim to there were totally two moons without passing through the myth layer, you've basically speedrun the entire humanities department. And listen to me, that layer matters. I'm going to use a word that's been abused on the internet. Mythcraft. I need you to hear this very clearly. This is not an insult. This is not me calling ancient people stupid fanfic writers staring at the sky. Mythcraft is a craft. It's the process of taking raw, terrifying experiences, eclipses that turn day into night, comets that won't go away, impacts that throw dust into the stratosphere, and packaging them into gods, monsters, and symbolic moons that can actually survive 2,000 years of retelling. Here's the thing. Human memory on its own is terrible. Your brain can't store on June 4th a magnitude 7 impact happened west of here at 3:12 p.m. What it can store is the sky dragon ate the sun and only the king's ritual brought it back. So if you're an author priest in 1500 BCE, you turn an impact winter into years of darkness. You turn a bright temporary object in the sky, say a captured near-Earth object flaring in the atmosphere, into a rival moon, a second sun, a divine intruder who had to be slain. Once you start looking for that, you see the same motifs popping up everywhere. Mesopotamian texts talk about twin luminaries and a time when the heavens were doubled. Mesoamerican codices give you bleeding moons and suns that have to be restarted across successive ages. Polynesian traditions remember a shattered or devoured moon and chaotic skies before the current order. Different continents, different languages, but the same broad storyboard. Two suns, two moons, broken moons, skies in revolt. It's no wonder some researchers go, okay, maybe that's not just metaphor. Maybe that's a memory of real celestial disruptions. But then the pattern-seeking monkey part of our brain, the one that sees Jesus in toast and foreshadowing in every panel, takes over. We start treating every storm god as an exomoon, every flood as a tidal catastrophe, every sky war as orbital mechanics fan art. And this is where we need to slow down. Myth distorts time and scale. A single rough winter becomes 7 years of night. A couple months of weird tides become the ocean climbed the mountains. This is not a sin, this is normal. That's what stories do when they're shouted around fires for centuries. So just because multiple cultures talk about sky chaos does not mean they all literally watched a second moon spiral in and explode. They might be expressing universal human fears. Darkness, famine, cosmic abandonment, or straight up borrowing motifs from neighbours the way modern fandoms trade theories. So in this category, Mythcraft, we're going to treat these stories seriously, but not literally. The place we generate is. The question isn't, did this god exist? The question is, what kind of event would generate this pattern of symbols? Then later, when we drag in timestamps, ice cores and crater dates, we'll see which myths, if any, survive the jump from pure mythcraft into the maybe eyewitness bucket. And some of them do something very suspicious when you line them up against the geology. And some of them do something very suspicious when you line them up against the geology. But before we sprint off into impact basins and orbital mechanics, we need to pump the brakes and ask a very boring, very necessary question. What did the first people who actually counted stuff in the sky think they were seeing? Not the poets, not the myth guys. The spreadsheet priests start in Babylon. You've got astronomer priests on ziggurats, night after night, logging lunar phases, eclipse cycles and risings with a level of dedication that makes your average fandom power scaler look casual. They nail the Saros cycle. They use the moon to schedule wars and rent payments. In those cuneiform tablets, the moon is a singular, capital M object. The moon was eclipsed. The moon stood in such and such constellation. One boss light in the night shift. Egypt, same story, different aesthetic. Lunar months tied to festivals, to the Nile, to the dead. The writing is drenched in metaphor, and you do get phrases about the many lights of the night, or twin eyes of gods, or the sky bearing her children. Modern multiple moons fans see that and go, aha, foreshadowing. But here's the thing, that's us being pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast. In the practical calendar texts, it's still one moon doing one job. Swing over to early Chinese records, and it gets even more brutal. These people were running a bureaucratic QA department on the heavens. Bought astronomers in the Zhou and Han eras, logs comets, guest stars, halos, weird colours, eclipses down to the day. If there had been a second bright satellite cruising through a stable orbit for any decent stretch of time, you'd expect at least one memo. What we get instead is the moon was eaten. The moon was obscured. Always singular. Always treated as the main character. Mesoamerica? Same pattern. Maya and Aztec astronomer priests built entire calendar systems around the moon's phases and its dance with Venus. The codices show rabbit in the moon motifs, gods wearing the moon as a headdress, and occasionally, yes, two or many heavenly fires. But when you drill into the counts and the tables, the operational model is one moon, very busy, no understudies. Then you hit the classical math nerds. Greek authors start trying to turn this luminous disk into geometry, distance estimates, parallax arguments, models of orbital periods. Indian astronomers are doing the same with nakshatras and detailed lunar theory, calculating eclipses with frankly rude accuracy for people with no telescopes. Across all those schools, you get arguments about epicycles, spheres, even whether the moon is a polished rock or a divine lamp. You do not get a serious sustained tradition that says, by the way, Earth has 2 natural satellites, here's their orbit chart. Now, listen to me. Absence is not disproof. Our record is shredded. We're working off fragments, translations of translations, commentaries written centuries later. It is entirely possible someone saw something weird, wrote second moon in the margin, and that scroll turned into a mouse nest before Rome fell. This is not a sin. This is normal when you do history at this distance, but the silence still matters. When the most obsessive sky accountants on the planet all converge on one moon as the default category, you have to treat that as data, which is why the real plot twist doesn't kick in here. The multiple moons drama doesn't really live in naked eye antiquity. It starts creeping in the moment we point glass at the sky, realize Jupiter hoards moons like a dragon hoards gold, and then someone goes, very quietly, so where are ours? So here's the thing. Once we start pointing telescopes at the sky, Earth stops being the main character and turns into the weird supporting extra that doesn't match the costume department. Galileo points his janky little spyglass at Jupiter in 1610, and suddenly there are 4 bright dots doing laps around it. Io, Europa, Ganymede, Callisto, a whole miniature system. Not poetic metaphors, not gods, literal moons. That was offensive to the old mental model. One planet, one moon, neat little cosmic nuclear family. Then Jupiter shows up as the guy who brings 4 kids to the party and doesn't warn the host, and it doesn't stop. Over the next 2 centuries, astronomers keep upgrading the hardware, and the universe keeps saying, oh, you thought that was it? Saturn gets Titan, then a growing entourage. Uranus, which already has enough problems with the name, turns out to have multiple satellites too, so the category quietly flips. Moons are not rare trophies. Moons are normal. Multi-moon systems are normal, having a whole stack of different sizes, different orbits, different histories. This is fine. This is normal. You get to the 19th century and any honest inventory of the solar system reads, Most big planets are hoarders, and then there's Earth, standing in the corner with one plus-size moon and no siblings. I need you to feel how destabilizing that is for the storytelling we'd been doing about ourselves. Because once you admit that one planet, one moon is not the rule but the exception, you open a door you cannot close again. You have to start asking, is Earth's single moon status some deep physical necessity, or is it just where the dice landed this epoch? And here's where the early speculation creeps in, half embarrassed. You get astronomers and philosophers wondering in the margins, could Earth capture another moon? Could we have lost one? They don't have modern orbital mechanics or n-body simulations. They have geometry, intuition, and a nagging sense that in a universe this messy, one moon forever feels suspiciously tidy. So they float scenarios, temporary companions, shattered satellites, captured asteroids that didn't stick. It's not rigorous yet, but it is intentional. They're poking the model. Fast forward to the exoplanet era, and the whole thing looks even more ridiculous. We now see systems with hot Jupiters skimming their stars, planets in resonant chains, debris disks packed with rubble. We run simulations where giant impacts spawn multiple moons that later merge or escape. We literally catalogue quasi-satellites and near-Earth objects that already do weird pseudo-moon orbits around us. In that context, maybe Earth had transient extra moons at some point isn't a wild conspiracy. It's the boring middle of the distribution. Listen to me. Clinging to one moon, exactly one moon, for all of geological time, in that environment isn't caution, it's ideology. It's the community comforting itself with a clean story, and this is not a sin. Humans crave tidy narratives. I'm a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. I get it, but if you're doing science, you don't get to treat Earth's current sky as sacred canon. You have to treat it as a snapshot, which means the real question isn't, did Earth ever have more moons? It's how would we even tell if it did? And that's where the scars start showing up. So before we start summoning rogue moons out of nowhere, we need to talk about the extremely boring, extremely important canon, how the moon is supposed to have gotten here in the first place. Because if you don't understand the official origin story, you can't see where the cracks are, and the cracks are where the fun lies. Historically, people have thrown the whole kitchen sink at this problem. Early on, you had the fission idea. Earth was spinning so fast that a chunk of molten rock yeeted off the equator and became the moon. Cute, cinematic, solves the why are there rocks so similar question, but the angular momentum math absolutely hates it. Then there's capture. The moon started as a wandering body. Earth's gravity snagged it. Roll credits. The problem is that capturing a whole planetary companion without either flinging it away or smashing it into pieces is non-trivial. You need drag. You need energy loss. You need a whole Rube Goldberg machine. Third option, co-formation. In this version, Earth and Moon grow up together from the same disk of material around the young sun. Two siblings condensing in the same neighborhood. This handles the shared chemistry. But then you have to explain why the Moon is so iron poor compared to Earth, and why the angular momentum of the system is so weirdly specific. None of these early theories cleanly hit all the constraints at once, which brings us to the current main character, the giant impact hypothesis. Here's the thing. Instead of Earth gently adopting a moon, you have a Mars-sized body, Theia, slamming into early Earth. The collision vaporizes and splashes rock into orbit. That debris forms a disk, and out of that disk the moon accretes. One big, messy, cosmic car crash. And the reason this became dominant is that it threads the needle. It can explain the moon's low iron core, the high angular momentum, and with some tuning, the insanely close match in isotopes between Earth rocks and lunar rocks. But notice what happens once you start doing actual simulations. The neat, single-impact Hollywood version starts to fray. Some models prefer multiple giant impacts, not one. Others show hit-and-run collisions where an impactor only partially merges and then comes back for seconds. And a whole category of simulations naturally spits out not one moon, but several moonlets. A primary outer moon, plus smaller inner companions that either merge over time or get flung away. In a lot of these runs, you get temporary co-orbital companions, Trojan-style clumps sharing Earth's orbit, or inner moons skimming just above the Roche limit, slowly spiraling inward under tidal forces until they smear themselves back onto Earth. No permanent, photogenic two moons in the sky for billions of years. More a chaotic, shifting cast that mostly dies young and messily. This is not a sin. This is not bad modelling. This is normal when you let gravity and conservation laws do their thing instead of forcing a clean narrative. So listen to me. Even the conservative, peer-reviewed, tenure-safe models already contain a multiple moons phase. It's just compressed into the chaotic early chapters and edited out of the final cut. The author of the solar system did not write a tidy one-moon story from page 1. They wrote a crowded draft and then killed most of the darlings. And I need you to keep that in your head, because the next step is asking whether any of those deleted characters left speaking roles in Earth's rocks, Earth's tides, and Earth's myths. So when you hear multiple moons, your brain probably goes straight to ancient myths and clickbait thumbnails with 6 glowing orbs over the pyramids. But listen to me. There is an actually serious version of this idea where Earth didn't just have random passing rocks, it had a long-term second moon sharing the stage for millions of years. Not forever, long enough to matter, long enough to leave scars. In the broadest category, these are two moon hypotheses, variants of one basic pitch. Early Earth ends up with a big outer moon, the one we have, plus a smaller companion in a tighter orbit, same general plane, same family, not some weird adopted asteroid. This inner moon hangs around for ages, quietly doing orbital choreography before the tide-driven slow dance goes wrong and something has to give. It either spirals into Earth, gets slingshotted away, or crashes into the main moon. That last option is where things get very interesting. Here's the thing. Our moon is lopsided. The near side, the face you see, is thinner crusted and flooded with dark maria. The far side has a thicker crust, fewer seas, and a totally different vibe. That asymmetry is a real problem in lunar science, not a YouTube invention. One influential model basically says, what if the far side is wearing the corpse of its little sibling? In this scenario, a smaller inner moon, maybe a few % of the main moon's mass, slowly spirals outward and then splats, low speed, onto the far side. Not a catastrophic shattering, more a cosmic pancake. You don't dig a giant basin, you smear extra crust on one hemisphere. The pancake moon crowd isn't just doing fan fiction. They lean on actual data, crustal thickness maps from Grail that show the far side's beefed up shell, compositional differences between the two hemispheres, and computer simulations where a slow merger produces a one-sided pylon instead of total destruction. Dynamically, it's plausible. The equations do not immediately throw this in the trash. In terms of storytelling, it's very clean. One extra character explains multiple weird personality quirks in the moon at once. Bad, the community is cautious, and we need to understand why. For every neat X-Moon did it explanation, there's a more boring, more incremental one. Asymmetric heating when the moon was molten could have thickened one side. A lopsided history of giant impacts could have thinned the near side and left the far side relatively untouched. The crustal and chemical data are noisy. The simulations depend on a ton of initial assumptions, and no one has found a smoking gun fossil of the lost sibling in Apollo rocks. This is not a sin. This is normal. Most bold ideas die in peer review. Still, this two-moon scenario is our first serious maybe. Not myth, not pure conspiracy, but a mathematically modelled, geophysically motivated lost satellite that could in principle have existed. And I need you to hold that door open in your head, because the next candidates for deleted moons don't just rewrite the moon's face. They try to rewrite Earth's tides, Earth's climate, and maybe some of those impossible stories ancient fans kept telling. So here's where this stops being abstract orbital fanfic and starts getting uncomfortably current. Because while we argue in the community about hypothetical ancient moons, Earth is out here right now quietly speedrunning a multiple moon lifestyle on human timescales, on your timescale. Astronomers have a very boring name for this: temporarily captured orbiters, TCOs. Little asteroids that wander too close, fall into Earth's gravitational influence, do a few messy laps, and then either escape back into solar orbit or die in the atmosphere. Not myth, not allegory. Actual measured rocks doing cameo appearances as moons. The poster child is 2006 RH120, roughly 2 to 3 meters across, so we're talking car size, not Death Star. We was first spotted by the Catalina Sky Survey, and at first it just looked like a near-Earth asteroid. But when people ran the orbit backwards, it turned out this thing had been bound to Earth for about a year, from 2006 to 2007, looping out beyond the moon and back in on a weird lopsided path. For that year, if you're being strict about categories, Earth had a second natural satellite. And here's the thing, 2006 RH120 was only obvious because it was big enough and bright enough for our current surveys. There's strong modelling work saying there are probably always a few pebble to boulder sized TCOs buzzing around us, moons in everything but PR department. We miss most of them because our detection net is tuned for civilization-ending problem, rather than cute little example that ruins clean textbook diagrams. We've even had suspected mini-moons that turned out to be our own trash. Remember 2020 SO, the mysterious object that slipped into orbit and then got unmasked as a 1960s rocket booster? That's the same capture mechanic. The physics doesn't care whether the object is primordial rock or human hardware. The gravitational storytelling is identical. Then you have the weird cousins. Quasi-satellites. These don't orbit Earth directly. They orbit the Sun, but in a one-year resonance with us. So from our point of view, they trace slow looping patterns in the sky. 3753 Crino is the famous one. If you plot its motion relative to Earth, you don't get a neat ellipse. You get a shifting bean-shaped track that makes you feel you've forgotten how orbits work. Is it a moon, a co-orbital companion, a background character with main character energy? The category lines start to blur. I need you to notice the pattern here. We want one moon, clean orbit, stable forever. Reality gives us a swarm of hangers-on, drop-ins and almost moons. This is not a sin. This is normal. The Earth-Moon system is not a static logo. It's a dynamic mess of captures, resonances, and near misses, pattern interrupt. If that's true now, with a mostly cleaned up solar system, what happens when you rewind to the chaotic early epochs, when there was vastly more debris to grab? If we already get car-sized TCOs and Cruitney-style quasi-satellites today, scaling that up to substantial captured moons in the deep past stops sounding outrageous and starts sounding, at minimum, mechanically plausible. And that's where we need to go next. From these tiny, well-observed mini-moons to the geological scars and tidal weirdness that some authors claim are the fingerprints of their bigger, lost predecessors. So if mini-moons are mechanically plausible, the next question is brutal and simple. Where are the bodies? If we had more substantial moons, they didn't just Irish goodbye out of the solar system. They hit something, they left scars. Impact basins of those scars turned up to 11. We're talking huge multi-ring structures hundreds or thousands of kilometers across, where the crust basically pancaked, rebounded and froze mid-scream. On the moon you get monsters like Imbrium and Serenitatis. On Earth, eroded ghosts such as Sudbury and Vredefort. And here's the thing, buried in the shape of those rings, the melt sheets, the ejector patterns, you can back-solve the size, speed and angle of whatever did the punching. It's forensic storytelling. The crater is the confession letter. Then you have crater chains and doublets, neat rows of impacts, or twin craters sitting uncomfortably close together that scream, this was not a single clean bullet. Planetary geologists will map the alignment, measure the spacing, and reconstruct whether an incoming body got torn apart just before impact or arrived as a gravitationally bound pair. The geometry is doing the foreshadowing. Now, fringe multiple moons authors look at this catalogue and go, crime scenes. A multi-ring basin becomes, in their reading, the smoking gun of a disintegrating captured moon, a doublet crater on Earth, or the moon. Clearly the fossil of a binary satellite system finally losing the plot and plummeting inward. You can find papers and conference talks where South Pole Aitken is treated as the chalk outline of a murdered companion moon. I need you to hear how emotionally satisfying that is. It ties everything together. It flatters our inner pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. Mainstream interpretation is way more boring and unfortunately way more constrained by math. Most doublets are explained by binary asteroids which we actually observe today, or by tidal breakup of a single object that wandered too close and got stretched into a string of pearls before impact. This is not a sin. This is not the community refusing to dream. It's just that you don't need a long-term orbiting moon when a one-time visitor plus gravity will do. The moon's own face is the control sample. Those huge basins, many of them date to the late heavy bombardment, roughly 4.1 to 3.8 billion years ago, when the inner solar system was getting pelted by leftover debris. South Pole Aitken, one of the largest known impact structures anywhere, probably formed in that general era. Its age, depth and chemistry tell you there were big things flying around, but they also fence off when those big things were allowed to exist. If a substantial moon spiraled in much later, it would have to thread that timeline needle. So here's the test we actually care about. If a lost moon really plunged into Earth or the moon, what would its crater signature be? A basin so oversized it distorts global crustal thickness? A chain of impacts marching along a very specific orbital track? We need to ask whether any known structures even vaguely match that category, or whether we're just retrofitting random scars into a planned narrative. And that's where the argument either levels up or falls apart. So if craters are the bruises, tides are the heartbeat. And this is where the story either gets incredibly satisfying or incredibly annoying, depending on how attached you are to extra moons. Tidal rhythmites sound boring. They're not. They're literally layered mud that remembers what the ocean was doing hundreds of millions of years ago. Every tide lays down a thin layer of sediment. Spring and neap tides modulate that. Seasons modulate that. Stack that long enough and you get this barcode of daily, monthly and yearly cycles frozen into rock. It's the universe's Fitbit data for Earth's rotation. From those rhythmites, you can count how many tidal cycles fit into 1 year at different points in deep time. More cycles per year means shorter days. Fewer cycles means longer days. That's simple, that's brutal. You can back out not just how long a day was, but how far the moon had to be for tides of that strength to exist. And over hundreds of millions of years, the trend is crystal. Days get longer, the moon slowly recedes. The whole system behaves exactly how single moon tidal physics says it should. Now, here's the thing. We don't just have mud, we have skeletons doing the same job. Certain fossils are obsessive overachievers in the timekeeping department. Ancient corals grow daily rings and seasonal bands. Bivalve shells record tiny growth increments tied to daylight and temperature. When you slice them and count, you get how many days per year at the moment that animal was alive. That's independent of the mud. Different archive, same clock. And when you put the rhythmites and the fossils on the same graph, they agree embarrassingly well. Corals from around 400 million years ago say there were roughly 400 days in a year. Rhythmites from similar ages back that up. That means shorter days, faster spinning Earth-Moon closer in. As you move forward in time, the day lengthens, the moon backs off and the curve is smooth. Not perfectly smooth, but smooth in the way you'd expect from one big tidal partner and some continental rearrangement chaos, which raises the annoying question I need you to sit with. If Earth had a second substantial moon hanging around for any meaningful stretch, where is the glitch in this clockwork? A new tidal source of that scale doesn't politely whisper. It screams. You'd expect sudden jumps in tidal amplitude, weird modulations in the daily cycle, maybe a sharp change in how fast the day is lengthening. Somewhere in the rhythmites, somewhere in the corals, the graph should kink instead of drift. Do we see that? Not really. There are local anomalies, noisy sections, intervals where the data are sparse or the interpretation is messy. This is normal. Rock records get eroded, fossils get cooked, signal gets fuzzy, and this is not a sin. It's just what happens when your archive is made of sand and calcium instead of hard drives. But nothing in the published curve stands up, waves its arms and yells, "Hey, there was a second moon here for 10 million years." Listen to me though. Nothing screams is not the same category as nothing could possibly be hiding. The resolution is limited. A smaller companion moon, a transient captured body, a short chaotic episode, that could slip through the cracks of our mud and coral clocks, leaving only the faintest wobble. And if there is a wobble, If the heartbeat stutters for a geological blink, we might need to stop staring at the tides and start interrogating the myths that claim the sky itself once changed. And if there is a wobble, then we have to talk about the wobble. Because once you start staring at Earth's spin, you realize the planet is doing a whole circus routine while pretending to be a nice stable marble. So, quick grounding. Earth is tilted about 23.5 degrees. That tilt is why you get seasons. Now imagine the whole planet as a spinning top on a table, and the moon and the sun are two kids poking it over and over. A spin doesn't just sit there, it slowly traces a circle. That slow cone motion is axial precession. One full loop takes about 26,000 years. On top of that, you get smaller jitters, nutation, where the tilt angle wiggles by fractions of a degree over shorter cycles. It's messy, but it's plan messy. The equations are not surprised. Here's the thing. Once you tell the community the moon is literally talking Earth's axis, someone is going to say, what if there were more moons? And they do. There's a whole fringe category of papers, blogs, and late-night PowerPoints claiming that the observed precession rate or certain historical climate swings don't quite add up with just one moon pulling the strings. The argument is the top is wobbling too fast or in the wrong pattern, so there must have been an extra hand on it. A lost satellite, a missing source of talk foreshadowing some cosmic crime. The more ambitious versions drag in Milankovitch cycles. Those are the planned clockwork changes in Earth's orbit and tilt. Eccentricity, obliquity, precession, you combine them and you get pacing for ice ages, over tens to hundreds of thousands of years. Except when paleoclimate records don't line up perfectly with the neat Milankovitch predictions, some fans of the lost moon idea jump in and say, hidden talk, secret moon. Checkmate mainstream astrophysics. I need you to hear how pattern-seeking monkey that is. We see a slightly crooked line on a graph and immediately start seeing Jesus in the precession data. Mainstream response? It's basically, slow down. Need to add all the boring stuff before we summon extra satellites. Solar tides matter. Planetary perturbations from Jupiter and friends matter. Internal mass redistribution as mantle flows, earthquakes shift fault blocks, and whole ice sheets melt and regrow every single week. That absolutely matters. There's even glacial isostatic adjustment changing Earth's moment of inertia over thousands of years, nudging the spin the way a figure skater pulling in their arms speeds up. When you feed those into detailed models, most of the mystery wobble evaporates. Are there leftovers? Yes, this is normal. For example, some specific intervals where deep-sea cores show climate transitions slightly out of phase with the clean Milankovitch curves are still debated. There are also small discrepancies in historical measurements of precession rate versus modern reconstructions. And sure, into those gaps, the Lost Moon crowd happily pours an entire vanished satellite, the way a bad author patches a plot hole with a surprise twin. But extra moons are a heavy hammer for very small nails. The rotational history of Earth is complicated, chaotic, and still being rewritten as we get better data. That doesn't mean hidden moon did it is the default explanation. It means the boring terrestrial physics is still being tuned. And if you really want to test the lost satellite idea, you can't just point at wobbles, you need scars. Which means we have to leave the sky for a second and read the ground. Because if extra moons were really here, they didn't just tug our axis, they hit something. They broke apart and they should have left a trail of craters and floods that's a lot harder to wave away. But we read the ground. We counted craters and tsunamis and extinction layers. But listen to me, ancient humans were doing their own version of this. They just used clay tablets instead of seismographs. If you want long-term sky receipts, you don't start with conspiracy forums. You start with the homework nerds of history. Chinese court astronomers, Babylonian priests, and later Islamic observatories. These people were paid to stare at the sky and complain in writing. Comets, eclipses, novae, guest stars that showed up, overstayed their welcome, then dipped. It's not casual stargazing. It's a bureaucracy of the heavens. Here's the thing. Buried in those logs are reports of bright, slow-moving objects that hung around for weeks or months. Not streaking across the sky in a night. Not a quick flash. Lingering. Drifting. The kind of thing that makes modern fans of the multiple moons theory sit up and go, okay, but And what if that was a mini-moon? You get Chinese chronicles describing a broom star that doesn't behave the way a normal comet should, or Babylonian tablets tracking a luminous object that crawls against the stars over an entire season. Later, Islamic astronomers write about strange wanderers that don't quite match the known planets. To a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast, this is irresistible. Extra moon confirmed, right? We need to slow down, because most of this stuff has boring, well-behaved explanations. A lot of those broom stars are absolutely comets, just with bad ancient PR. Some guest stars are supernovae or novae. They pop in, stay visible for months, then fade. Others are just Jupiter or Venus being dramatic in an unusual part of the sky. When you translate the descriptions carefully and run the dates through modern ephemerides, they drop very neatly into the existing category system. This is not a sin. This is not the community selling out to big astronomy. This is normal historical method. You start with a conservative read. If an intentional planned mini-moon interpretation isn't required, you don't reach for it. But there are a few reports that refuse to sit still. An object that's too bright to be a typical comet tail, too steady to be a fireball, moving too fast for a planet yet hanging around far too long for a meteor. One Chinese account, for example, talks about a star near the moon that keeps returning to roughly the same part of the sky over multiple nights while shifting against the background in a way that's awkward to model as just Mars being Mars. Could that be a captured fragment? A temporary satellite that dipped into a weird decaying orbit? For a mini-moon reading to work, you'd need it to be bright enough to rival the known planets, moving slowly enough that its nightly change in position is noticeable, but not dramatic, and crucially, you'd expect some hint that it's circling Earth, not just sliding along the zodiac. Almost none of these records explicitly describe orbital motion around Earth. They talk about motion relative to constellations, not looping around our sky the way the moon does. So, discipline time. Unless an account clearly shows that extra light going around us, not just past us, it stays in the interesting but not evidence bucket, which sets up the uncomfortable question we have to tackle next. If the written receipts are this vague, is the real foreshadowing for lost moons hiding somewhere even messier than clay tablets and crater maps? So if the receipts in stone are fuzzy, where do pattern-seeking monkeys go next? We go to myth. We go to the part of the archive where the authors didn't think they were doing science, they were doing storytelling, ritual, propaganda, and maybe accidentally eyewitness reports. Here's the thing. Once you start surveying global myths, you keep tripping over the same weird category error, a sky that does not match the one we have now. In Mesopotamia, you get tales of rival celestial bodies, younger gods challenging older lights, a second radiant presence that has to be defeated or chained before order returns. In Mesoamerica, you have stories of multiple suns burning the world, eras where the sky is too bright, then a cataclysm, then a darkened firmament where only the current sun survives. Sail out into Polynesian traditions and you find trickster heroes who lasso and tame the moon, or even more than one moon, dragging them into a new, slower, safer path. Different oceans, different languages, same recurring spine. There was once an extra luminous troublemaker in the sky, and it had to go. I need you to clock the parallels here, because they're not subtle. Over and over we see a second sun or moon that is destroyed, banished, hidden behind some veil. We see eras of chaos, floods, scorching, monsters roaming freely, and then, only after that celestial coup do we get the current stable sky order. Burst the fight upstairs, then the calendar makes sense. That's not one isolated example. That's a motif with mileage. Now, the boring adult in the room will say, obviously this is metaphor. And to be fair, that adult has a point. Two suns? That's an incredible narrative shorthand for political rivals, co-kings, competing priesthoods. Multiple moons? Perfect for unstable successions, civil wars, the transition from one religious order to another. When a dynasty gets overthrown, you don't publish a think piece. You tell a story where the old sun is struck down and the new one rises. This is not a sin. This is normal mythic foreshadowing for social upheaval. But listen to me. Even if we grant all of that symbolic reading, there's still a problem. Why this symbol? Why does extra bright thing in the sky that shouldn't be there keep showing up as the go-to metaphor for disruption. If you've never ever seen a second bright body hanging around for generations, are you really reaching for that image instead of, say, a big storm or a dragon? This is where the A-witness hypothesis sneaks in. If Earth picked up a temporary second moon, or a captured object flared in a weird resonant orbit for centuries, what kind of stories would fans of the night sky tell? You'd expect tales where that newcomer is arrogant, too hot, too close. You'd expect errors named after multiple suns, then a remembered disaster, then a demotion, the intruder shattered, exiled, or veiled. In other words, exactly the narrative beats we keep finding. Does that make the myths hard evidence? No. Without tight dating that lines up a specific legend with a specific impact layer or tidal anomaly, we're still in the realm of powerful mythcraft, not orbital mechanics. But we're also not done, because some of these two-sun stories cluster suspiciously near real craters and climate shocks. And when we line those up on a timeline, the foreshadowing gets a lot less metaphorical than you might be comfortable with. So when people hear that, they sprint straight to Stonehenge and go, "Ah, foreshadowing. The ancients knew the sky was different." And listen to me, we need to slow that down for a second. Archaeoastronomy, in theory, is very simple. You look at where old stones, temples, or pyramids are pointed. You compare that to where the sun, moon, and bright stars rise and set, and you ask, is this intentional? Stonehenge is the poster child, because those big outer stones really do bracket the summer solstice sunrise and winter solstice sunset. That's not vague mysticism. That's geometry plus the world's slowest calendar app. Mainstream researchers will absolutely tell you a ton of sites are doing this. Newgrange lining up the winter solstice sunrise. Charco Canyon tracking lunar standstills over an 18.6-year cycle. This is not fringe, this is fine. Within the category of one moon, predictable orbit, patient farmers, the storytelling is coherent. You don't need a secret second satellite doing donuts over Mesopotamia to explain why people cared where the sun came up. Here's the thing. Once the community gets a taste for alignments, some fans go full conspiracy speedrun, and suddenly every odd stone or side chamber is obviously pointing to a missing lunar path, or an inclination that only makes sense if there were two moons with different tilts, or a captured body that later crashed. The author of the site plan becomes a 4D chess grandmaster, encoding a whole lost solar system in granite. Take one popular example. People claim certain Stonehenge bluestones mark a second set of lunar rise points that don't match our current moon. The argument is that the angles are off by a few degrees, therefore, extra moon. The problem is, a few degrees is exactly where horizon altitude, tree lines, and your choice of which stone edge you measure from all conspire to mess with you. Shift your standing position by a meter, adjust for atmospheric refraction badly, and congratulations, you've discovered a phantom satellite. Pattern interrupt. I need you to imagine doing this with YouTube. If you're allowed to connect any thumbnails you want, in any order, you can prove that your recommended tab is secretly foreshadowing a second moon too. This is not a sin, this is normal. Our brains are pattern-seeking monkeys that see Jesus in toast and orbital mechanics in three wobbly rocks. Another example claims that Nazca lines or certain Mesoamerican ball courts only make sense with two moons. When you actually run the numbers, the orientations fall cleanly into solar events, the no lunar standstill range, or bright stars. The two-moon fits usually happen after you've thrown out half the data and only kept the alignments that behave. So yes, some megaliths are clocks, some are calendars, some are probably giant ritual flexes. But if the next stone circle promises evidence of lost satellites, we need to ask whether we're seeing ancient astronomy or just very modern overfitting. And here's where I need you to zoom out from stone circles and remember that the sky itself has been doing hard resets. Because while the community is busy arguing over whether three oddly placed boulders prove a second moon, Earth is sitting here with a literal smoking gun. Chicxulub. 66 million years ago, an object 10 kilometers across slammed into what's now the Yucatan. Firestorms, global tsunamis, a dust and sulfur sunblock that turned noon into twilight for months. If any intelligent species had been writing during that window, you would absolutely get myths of a broken sun, a murdered moon, a sky that betrayed them. Now that's deep time. That's pre-human. So fans of the lost satellites idea always jump to something closer. Enter the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Around 12,800 years ago, at the tail end of the last ice age, you get this weird climate sucker punch. Temperatures crash back to near glacial, megafauna start disappearing, human cultures stall or pivot. One controversial proposal says a swarm of comet fragments hit the ice sheets, kicked up dust, soot, and meltwater, and basically hit the atmosphere with a dark mode toggle. Is that settled science? No, it's an ongoing academic food fight. But here's the thing, even a regional airburst or impact can throw enough material into the sky to give you weeks of blood-red sunsets, ash snow, and a sun you can stare at without blinking. This is not a sin in the storytelling sense. If you survive that, you're going to tell your kids the sky caught fire and the world went dim. This is normal. We actually have Holocene and late Pleistocene examples on the books. The Campo del Cielo impacts in Argentina, the Rio Cuarto structures, the possible Burkle crater event in the Indian Ocean that some people tie to mega tsunami legends. Different scales, same basic effect. Rocks fall, atmosphere freaks out, humans respond with narrative. So of course, myths of floods, of days without dawn, of stars falling and a second sun dying, tend to cluster in the general neighbourhood of big climate shifts and impact candidates. You can open a comparative mythology book and watch authors speedrun straight from Fire from the Sky to, aha, Shattered Moon Fragment. Our pattern-seeking monkey brain sees Jesus in toast. It absolutely sees lost satellites in every crater. But we need to draw a hard category difference here. A big asteroid is a bullet. A moon is the gun. To claim a lost moon, you're not just saying large rock from space hit us once. You're saying there was a long-term orbital companion with mass and tidal influence on a totally different scale that then destabilized, fragmented, and left a multi-million-year signature in Earth's rotation, tides, and impact record. That requires orbital history, not just a dramatic explosion. So here's what we're going to do next. We're turning this into a courtroom drama. Section by section, we'll take the most popular shattered moon candidates, line them up against actual craters, climate curves, and tidal data, and ask, is this genuinely a lost satellite, or just a very loud space pebble with excellent PR? Listen to me. Some of these cases are going to hurt your favorite theories. This is fine. That's the cost of treating the sky as evidence, not fan fiction. So if we're going to accuse a moon of war crimes, we might as well start with the fan favorite suspect, the Younger Dryas. I need you to know how hard this period has been drafted into every cosmic disaster pitch on the internet. Very quick recap, so we're on the same page. About 12,900 years ago, the climate nosedives. Temperatures in the North Atlantic drop fast. Ice sheets stall their retreat. Ocean circulation probably gets punched in the gut. At the same time, you see megafauna extinctions accelerating in North America, mammoths and friends checking out, and human cultures doing a hard pivot. Clovis tool traditions fade, new regional styles appear, settlement patterns shift. It's chaos. Not dinosaurs get nuked chaos, but enough that you'd absolutely tell stories about the sky being angry. Enter the mainstream Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Not a moon exploded, just a swarm of comets or icy fragments slamming into the Laurentide ice sheet and maybe other targets. Proponents point to microspherules, melt glass, weird platinum spikes, and a couple of candidate craters. Impact energy vaporizes ice, dumps dust into the atmosphere, disrupts climate. Clean, terrifying, still arguable. And the community has been arguing hard. Some labs replicate the evidence, some don't. And the whole thing lives in this messy category of possible, interesting, not settled. This is normal. Now, here's the thing. A more extreme corner of the fandom looks at that same evidence and says, what if those weren't just passing comets? What if they were pieces of a captured moon that had been hanging around Earth, slowly decaying, until it finally shattered and rained death? Suddenly, you're not just telling an impact story. You're pitching a full lost satellite saga. Tides going wild, debris rings in the sky, global myth fodder baked in. On paper, It's incredible storytelling. In terms of actual physics, we need to talk. If you had a substantial captured moon in a close decaying orbit shortly before 12,900 years ago, it leaves fingerprints, big ones. Crater fields with coherent trajectories, energy budgets that dwarf what we infer from the sediments, tidal rhythmites recording insane short-term changes, rotational wobbles frozen into geological and archaeological records. You'd expect a pattern of impacts that screams former satellite instead of random outer solar system visitors. What we actually see is much more modest. Candidate craters are small to mid-scale. The debris seems patchy and regionally focused, and the total energy you can justify from the proxies is orders of magnitude below a moon-scale breakup. The distributions fit a swarm of comets or fragments grazing the planet, not the corpse of a world that used to raise your tides every night. You can force it into a shattered moon frame, but now you're doing that thing where the pattern-seeking monkey sees Jesus in toast and then writes a 300-page cosmology about sourdough. And this is not a sin. Refritrating big mythic language onto ambiguous data is how humans cope. This is fine, but in terms of intentional, planned orbital history, the Younger Dryas doesn't need a lost satellite to work. It's already a perfect sky terror story on its own, which raises a worse question. If the best candidate doesn't really support a shattered moon, what would a real one have to look like? A real shattered moon scenario has a PR problem, because if it ever happened, the sky would have been loud about it. And the stories we actually have? They're not talking about pebbles. They're talking about the entire world going under. So let's do the flood myth tour. You've got Mesopotamia's Atrahasis and Gilgamesh, where the gods get annoyed at noisy humans, send a deluge, and one guy with a boat and a guest list survives. We've got the Hebrew Bible's Noah, same basic structure, divine anger, rising waters, chosen survivors, reset button on civilization. In parts of India, you get Manu warned by a fish avatar of Vishnu. In Mesoamerica, in parts of Oceania, you keep seeing this pattern. The water climbs, the few are saved, the world restarts. The Lost Moon crowd looks at that shared skeleton and goes, tides. Obviously tides. Here's the thing. They propose an extra satellite in a decaying orbit, swooping closer and closer, whipping up tides hundreds of meters high, flexing Earth's crust, triggering earthquakes and volcanoes until everything drowns. Then the bad moon either crashes, breaks up, or gets ejected, and all we're left with is cultural trauma and very dramatic storytelling. I need you to notice what category that sits in. That's not just a flood. That's a full orbital horror movie. And on a vibes level, it's fantastic. It feels intentional. It feels planned. The problem is, the boring explanation for those same myths is really strong. Mainstream geology says, end of the last ice age, sea level rises over 100 meters, but stretched across thousands of years. Coastlines redraw. River valleys flood. You get events like the Black Sea outburst flood or massive tsunamis from landslides and quakes. If you're a Bronze Age community whose entire world is one river basin, a once-in-a-millennium megaflood is functionally the whole Earth ending. This is normal. This is not a sin in the storytelling. Pattern interrupt. Forget myths for a second and do the physics. Tidal force scales with mass and, crucially, with 1 over distance cubed. To get tides 10 or 100 times higher than today, you either need a moon-sized object skimming absurdly close, or a smaller object dipping so low it's basically on a collision course. That kind of encounter doesn't just slosh the oceans, it rips at plates, spikes volcanism, and leaves unmistakable signatures in tidal rhythmites, sediment layers, and impact debris. We track the Earth-Moon distance over hundreds of millions of years from rock records. There's no sudden, whoops, extra moon blip in there. So what is this theory actually doing? It's mythcraft plus retrofitting. Fans of the sky are treating flood stories as foreshadowing for a planned orbital twist, then backfilling the physics. The myths are real. The floods are real. The emotions are very real. But the extra moon is an author we don't need. And if you're annoyed at me for saying that, listen to me, because the next step is worse. When you apply the same lost satellite lens to every crater, every wobble, every weird tide, the story doesn't get cleaner. It gets messier. It gets messier, and here's the thing. Both sides keep insisting the other is ignoring the real science. So we need to actually put the two scripts on the table. What does orthodox astrophysics really say about Earth's moons, plural or singular? And what are the lost satellite people actually claiming? Because right now the community is arguing with strawmen and vibes. Mainstream first. In the standard model, you get one big moon from one stupidly huge collision early on. Proto-Earth gets smacked by a Mars-sized body. Debris sprays out, and within a few tens of millions of years, that debris gravitationally self-organizes into a single dominant satellite. Early on, it's messy, multiple clumps, unstable moonlets, stuff raining back down. Over time, most of the junk either crashes into Earth, hits the moon, or gets ejected. What's left is one major moon slowly spiraling outward, and occasionally tiny visitors. Those tiny visitors are important. Even the most boring textbook model allows temporary captures, small asteroids looping Earth for months or years. Quasi-satellites like 3753 Crinu in weird resonant dances. Little moonlets that exist more as a category in simulations than as named objects. This is not a sin. This is not some forbidden thought. See, the author of the standard story is not writing a perfectly clean one moon fanfic. Now the lost satellite crowd. Their pitch is not, hey, maybe a rock got briefly snagged once. Their pitch is that Earth has hosted one or more substantial extra moons, think hundreds of kilometers across, in stable or semi-stable orbits for serious stretches of time. Not just a quick guest star, but a recurring character. These extra moons then supposedly collide with Earth, merge with the current moon, or get yeeted by resonances, leaving behind subtle foreshadowing in craters, tidal records, myths, you name it. And here's where the difference actually lives. Both camps accept that the early Earth-Moon system was chaotic. Both accept temporary captures and moonlets. Both accept that orbital mechanics can do weird, counterintuitive storytelling. The fight is over timescales and sizes. How big can a moonlet get before it stops being cute and starts shredding the system? How long can anything that big hang around without leaving an impact, record so loud, even a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast would have to admit it? So when a skeptic rolls in and goes, physics says there was only ever one thing orbiting Earth, end of discussion, that's just wrong. And when a believer insists mainstream models forbid any complexity beyond a single pristine marble in the sky, that's also wrong. Both are arguing with a badly summarized Wikipedia article. Listen to me. The interesting question is not multiple moons, yes or no. The interesting question is, which multiple moon scenarios are actually compatible with the math and the data we already have? Some lost satellite ideas are just aggressive headcanon. Others are weird but technically allowed. I need you to keep that distinction in your head, because the rest of this video is me drawing that line in painful detail, walking through which extra moon stories could be intentional features of Earth's history, and which ones require the universe to break its own writing rules. If the universe has writing rules, we need to talk about the grammar of orbits, because you can't just slap a second moon in the sky and call it foreshadowing for Atlantis. The solar system will absolutely copy-edit that draft for you. Here's the thing, the first rule is the Hill sphere. That's the region where Earth's gravity is the main character, and the sun is just background noise. Inside that bubble, Earth can own a satellite. Outside it, the sun steals custody back. And Earth, that Hill sphere is about 1.5 million seconds in radius. The moon sits at about 384,000 kilometers comfortably inside. A big second moon would have to live in that same neighborhood without getting dragged out into a solar orbit or flung into us. But being inside the Hill sphere is necessary, not sufficient. The orbit also has to be bound and not too stretched out, or every lap turns into a messy custody battle between Earth and Sun. Think of the Hill sphere as the dance floor at a crowded concert. You're technically in Earth's zone, but if you wander too close to the edge, the sun just elbows in and steals your partner. How do you even capture a moon in the first place? Gravity by itself is conservative. It doesn't drain energy. To go from a flyby to a stable orbit, something has to steal orbital energy. One option is a three-body interaction. Two objects swing past Earth. One loses energy and gets trapped. The other gets yeeted away faster. That's the gravitational equivalent of a mosh pit tackle. Another option, in the very early Earth when the atmosphere was thick and hot, is drag. A passing body plows through the upper atmosphere, slows down and ends up bound. Later on, when Earth has oceans and a crust, you can also bleed energy through tides. The new moon raises bulges on Earth, those bulges lag behind, and the friction turns orbital energy into heat. And then, of course, you can lose the moon again. Tidal interactions can make an orbit decay inward until the satellite spirals down and either crashes or gets torn into a ring. Gravitational kicks from the sun or other planets can pump up the orbit's eccentricity until one close pass goes wrong and the moon escapes. Collisions with other debris can nudge it into a death spiral or shatter it completely. Moons are dancers in a crowded mosh pit of gravity. Some pairs waltz for billions of years. Others bump shoulders once and exit missing teeth. Now, listen to me, because this is where the community usually goes full pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. The question isn't, could Earth ever have a second moon? That's easy. Under the rules we just laid out, temporary captures and weird quasi-satellites already happen. We literally track objects that do horseshoe orbits around us. And the real problem is stricter. Could we have a substantial second moon hanging around for millions of years without wrecking the geological and tidal record we actually see, as tides are receipts? Tidal rhythmites in ancient rocks, fossil growth rings, coral layers, they all record how far the moon was and how strong the tides were. A big extra moon should leave fingerprints in those layers, in Earth spin rate, in impact scars. If it's there, it's not just an aesthetic choice, it's an intentional plot point. And if it's not there, then any lost moon theory that needs a gigantic long-term companion is already in trouble before we even open the myth books, which is exactly where we're going next, into the stories, the stone circles, and the two moons traditions that fans keep pointing at as Exhibit A and testing whether they survive this orbital cross-examination. And here's where the myths run headfirst into math. You can argue about whether a carving is two moons or two coconuts, but orbital mechanics, that does not care about your community headcanon. So modern researchers do the one thing you and I can't do in our backyard. They boot up these brutal little n-body simulations and just start throwing extra moonlets at early Earth to see what survives. I need you to picture what that actually means. You take a hot, post-giant impact Earth wrapped in a debris disk. You let the code condense that rubble into not one neat moon, but a whole swarm of little proto-moons. Then you hit play on a few million years of gravitational pinball and watch who gets yeeted, who gets merged, and who face plants into the planet. And here's the thing. The computers are not on the side of a long-term multi-moon Earth. Over and over, you get the same broad pattern. Multiple small moons can form. This is normal. This is fine. But on geological timescales, they do not politely line up and stay put. They spiral inward and smash together to make a bigger primary. They get pumped into unstable orbits and slam into Earth in a fireworks show you'd absolutely notice in the rock record. Or they get flung out of the system altogether. Now, pass and interrupt. Buried in all that chaos, there are these weirdly stable edge cases. The simulations do cough up scenarios where a smaller companion hangs around for a while, not forever, but long enough that if you were a very confused trilobite staring up at the sky, you might swear Earth had two moons. You get co-orbital configurations, Trojan companions parked 60 degrees ahead or behind the main moon, resonant orbits where a tiny body keeps dodging disaster for tens of millions of years. We already have real-world cousins to this. Quasi-satellites such as 3753 Cruitner do this bizarre horseshoe dance with Earth right now. They're not proper moons, but they prove the category exists. Objects that share our orbital neighborhood without crashing the party immediately. Simulations of the early debris disk just crank that up to 11 and let those interactions run hot, but constraints snap shut fast. Too big or too close and an extra moon absolutely wrecks the tides. You get monstrous tidal ranges, insane heating, rotational slowdowns that would carve a huge clear signature into those tidal rhythmites geologists read to track ancient day length. You'd also expect doublet impact basins, global debris layers, all the smoking guns fans desperately want as foreshadowing for a lost satellite. Too small or too short-lived, and is basically a ghost. It doesn't leave an obvious tidal fingerprint. Its impacts blur into the background noise of the late heavy bombardment. For later storytellers, it's indistinguishable from just another rock fell. So simulations don't slam the door on multiple moons' histories. They do something more annoying. They squeeze the allowed parameter space down to this very narrow, very specific set of conditions. Modest mass, awkward distance, awkward lifetime. Which means if an author called nature ever planned a second moon into Earth's story, it had to be a very precise character. And that, in turn, gives us a test. When we go back to the scars, the craters, the tidal records, we can ask, do any of them actually match that character? Or are we just pattern-seeking monkeys seeing Jesus in the toast of random impacts? So let's test that toast. If there really was a lost little sister moon that died young, we shouldn't just have vibes and cool animations. We should see her fingerprint stamped into the moon we do have. And the most suspicious fingerprint is that the moon is wrong. It's lopsided. The near side, the one facing us, is this dark, low, basaltic face covered in giant lava seas. The far side, the one we didn't see until the space age, has a crust that's tens of kilometers thicker on average. Same object, same orbit, completely different volcanic history. That's been a problem in lunar geology for decades. Here's the thing. If the moon formed from a global magma ocean that slowly froze, your default expectation is roughly symmetric meatball, not two-faced cartoon character. So people started asking, did something specifically happen to the far side? Enter the companion moon model. In this story, the author of the solar system did some pre-writing. You don't just have one big post-impact moon, you briefly have two. A main moon and a smaller trailing moonlet sharing the orbit. Over tens of millions of years, orbital resonances nudge that little sibling inward until it gently splats onto the far side. Not a high-velocity crater punch, more a slow-motion car crash. Material piles up, thickening the crust, but the energy isn't high enough to fully remelt the moon. You get a fat, mountainous far side and a thinner, more eruptive near side. On paper, that is an extremely satisfying foreshadowing style payoff. But I need you to resist the urge to stop there and go, boom, solved. Because the community of actual lunar modelers has other candidates in this category. One alternative, asymmetric tidal heating from Earth. Early on, the moon was closer. Earth was a huge glowing problem in the sky. That gravitational flexing doesn't have to be perfectly even. You can cook one hemisphere more, keep its mantle hotter for longer, and that side will do more volcanism. More lava, thinner effective crust, darker face. No extra moon required. Another, the magma ocean itself might have frozen unevenly. Compositional gradients, floating crustal icebergs, and thermal feedbacks can all produce thick and thin patches without any external collision. Add on top a few monster far side impacts, and you can redistribute crust, excavate deep material, and complicate the map further. So how would we actually know if a dead moonlet is involved, and not just clever retrofitting? We'd need receipts. Specific compositional differences in the far side highlands that scream exotic pylon, not just slightly different crystallization. Buried basin scale structures that match a slow merger, not a normal crater. High precision seismic data from a future network of landers that can tomograph the interior and say, yeah, there's an extra pancake glued on over here. Right now we don't have that. We have a physically motivated idea that explains one very real asymmetry sitting next to other physically motivated ideas that also explain it. This is not a sin, this is normal. Nature retrofits her own story all the time. Multiple processes can converge on the same visible outcome. So when fans of lost satellites point to the lopsided moon and say, this proves there was another one, I need you to hear the difference between this is consistent with and this is uniquely predicted by. The companion moon crash is perched right on that border between evidence and pattern seeking. It's not pure myth-driven wishful thinking. But it's not a confession letter either. And if we're honest, that ambiguity is where the fun starts, because the moon is not the only place people think they see ghost impacts. And once you start seeing ghost impacts on the moon, your brain does the obvious thing. It starts looking for the impact trail, the scar, the skid mark, the place where the doomed little companion moon allegedly came in hot and carved its own obituary across the surface. Enter crater chains. Or, if you want the official, Latin-sounding term that makes this feel more serious than your uncle's Facebook theory, catenae. These are rows of craters, sometimes dead straight, sometimes gently curved, marching across the regolith in a way that screams, something came apart here. They're real. They're weird. And they are catnip for a community that already wants a falling moon narrative. Here's the thing. There are perfectly boring, perfectly beautiful ways to make a crater chain that do not require a dying satellite. One is secondary impacts. A big asteroid hits, throws out a spray of boulders. Those chunks arc out on similar trajectories, then smack down in tidy lines. Another is tidal disruption of a single comet or asteroid, where gravity stretches it into a string of beads. The fragments follow nearly the same path. They hit one after another. Boom, a chain. You've seen a version of this in real time. Remember comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 hitting Jupiter in 1994? Tidal forces shredded it into a train of pieces. Each fragment punched its own bruise into Jupiter's atmosphere, lined up almost politely. No binary moon required. Just one object, pulled apart, still obeying orbital mechanics. Now, Lost Moon fans look at lunar features like Catena Davy or the chains near Mare Imbrium and go, there, that's the death spiral. That's the final path of the second moon as it disintegrated and rained down. I need you to notice what's happening there. They're treating the chain as foreshadowing in reverse. The line of craters is the breadcrumb trail, and the missing moon is the payoff they've already decided must exist. So we need to test that story. Take Catena Davy. It's about 50 kilometers long, made of small, roughly similar craters. If this were the last breaths of a substantial satellite, you'd expect a different scale. Impacts ramping up in energy, basin-sized wounds, global ejector blankets, a geological panic attack recorded all over the crust. Instead, you get modest pits in a localized context that fits way better with a disrupted asteroid or secondary splash from a known basin. Same problem on Earth. People point to aligned crater fields or supposed Great Circle impact rows and whisper about a moon being peeled apart. But when you run the numbers on spacing, on fragment mass, on entry angles, the patterns sit comfortably in the Shoemaker-Levy 9 but smaller category. This is not a sin. This is not bad storytelling from the universe. This is normal. And listen to me. I get the temptation. A crater chain feels intentional. It feels planned. It feels authored. Our pattern-seeking monkey brain sees a dotted line and immediately imagines a vanished pen. But the physics keep dragging us back to humbler culprits, which raises an uncomfortable question the Lost Moon community doesn't really want to sit with. If the chains aren't the death spiral, where would a real moonfall actually leave its mark? So if a real moonfall wouldn't leave neat little chains, where do people go next? They go to the oceans. They go, but the tides remember. And I need you to hear how seductive that sentence is, because this is where a lot of lost moon arguments try to get clever. Here's the thing, modern tide modelling is already absurdly complicated before you throw in secret X-moons. We're talking the moon's gravity, the sun's gravity, Earth's rotation, the Coriolis effect, plus the exact shape and depth of every basin and continental shelf. Oceanographers use big Fourier decompositions, harmonic constituents, numerical models that chew through supercomputer time, and when they plug in just the known bodies, the broad tidal patterns show up. High where they should be high, delayed where they should be delayed. Now the fringe pitch. You've probably seen this in the community, screenshots of some random harbour with a tiny tidal range, next to a bay with a 6-metre swing, and the caption is basically, explain this without a missing moon, sheeple, or claims that certain resonance patterns, the way tides slosh in the Bay of Fundy or the Mediterranean, are leftovers from when Earth's oceans were tuned to a different lunar configuration. It feels intentional, it feels planned, it feels authored. Our pattern-seeking monkey brain sees a weird rhythm and immediately assumes there must be a hidden drummer. Except, again, fluid dynamics is just mean. The mainstream explanation is boring, in the exact same way good foreshadowing is boring once you see the outline. It's all geometry and timing. Weak. Local bathymetry, the depth profile of the seafloor, can amplify or kill a tide. Narrow inlets, broad shelves, the exact length of a basin compared to the 1-2 hour tidal period can set up resonances where water piles up dramatically in one spot and barely moves in another. You do not need an extra celestial body, you need a different shaped bathtub. Pattern interrupt. There actually are real tidal anomalies. There are ports where the timing is off by hours, amphidromic points where the tidal range is basically zero, spots where the high tide on one side of a peninsula corresponds to low tide on the other. This is fine. This is normal. When models miss, oceanographers do not go, "Ah yes, the ghost moon." They go, "Our bathymetry grid is trash," or "We're missing a resonance term." And then they fix the grid, tweak the equations, and the anomaly quietly shrinks. Do any documented tidal oddities actually resist explanation to the point that a lost satellite is the only remaining category? No. Are the models perfect down to every cove and marina? Also no, but no serious researcher has had to smuggle in an invisible moon to close their equations. The problem is not that tides are hinting at a hidden author in the sky. The problem is that water sloshing on a spinning irregular rock is a nightmare to simulate. But we need to set a standard here. Weird does not automatically mean lost satellite. Weird usually just means our math is coarse or our planet is messy. And if you're going to claim the oceans are whispering about an ex-moon, then in the next section we have to ask, where are the hard receipts in the rocks, not just in the waves? But before we start cross-examining every crater as Exhibit A in the case of the missing moon, we need to talk about the real culprit here. Your brain. My brain. The pattern-seeking monkey that's been running the show since we were trying not to get eaten in the dark. Here's the thing. Evolution did not optimize you to be an objective astronomer. It optimized you to overreact. Hear a rustle in the grass? If you assume predator and it's just the wind, you feel silly. If you assume wind and it's a predator, you die. So the brain bakes in a bias. False positives are cheap, false negatives are fatal. You become a hyperactive foreshadowing detector, seeing intent and structure everywhere, because missing the tiger once was worse than inventing 10 imaginary tigers. Now drag that same nervous system under a clear night sky, and you get what we have now. Fans of the cosmos connecting every dot into a story. You see a double crater, and your inner monkey goes, "Ah, twins! 2 bullets, 2 moons." You hear a Polynesian myth about a second moon that fell, and a Mesopotamian story about 2 lights in the sky. And suddenly, this isn't random folklore anymore. It feels intentional. It feels planned. The universe is doing narrative. That's confirmation bias in action. Once you enjoy the lost satellite story, you start curating reality for callbacks. You scroll past 100 boring single impacts, then stop dead on a weird multi-ring basin because it fits the theory. You read about tidal rhythmites recording Earth's changing day length and only remember the paragraph where someone mentions a temporary captured moon. The problem isn't that you're stupid. This is normal. This is how the community, collectively, does storytelling about data. And I need you to see how silly this can get, because the Jesus in toast thing is not an exception. It's the rule. Burn a piece of bread, you get random noise. But if you prime someone with a sacred image first, suddenly those blotches resolve into an icon, the same pixels, different brain. In geology, the toast is random fracture patterns, erosion scars, chaotic ejector blankets. If you prime yourself with, "There used to be a second moon," every smudge on the crust starts looking like a lunar mugshot. But skeptics are not floating above this on a cloud of pure reason. The anti-pattern is still a pattern. If you've decided the multiple moons category as fringe nonsense, you can get so eager to swat it down that you underplay genuinely interesting anomalies or well-constructed models. A companion moon simulation that actually preserves angular momentum and matches some impact statistics, that deserves a fair read, even if the author also goes off the rails in chapter 2. So we need to hold both impulses in tension, enjoy the thrill of spotting echoes between myths, rocks, and orbital mechanics. This is fine. This is not a sin. But every time your brain whispers, that's foreshadowing for a lost satellite, stop and ask, would I still see this if I didn't already want it to be a moon? In the next section, we're going to stress test that question against the loudest alleged receipts for extra moons and see which patterns survive when you turn the priming off. So here's where we separate this crater looks cool from this could actually rewrite a textbook. We need to draw a hard line between fun, pattern-seeking monkey speculation and something a planetary scientist would at least be mildly annoyed to disprove instead of just scrolling past. In science, a hypothesis gets interesting the second it risks being wrong. Not when it sounds poetic, not when it vibes with a myth, when it makes clear, intentional predictions. A real model says, if Earth had a lost moonlet, then you should see this distribution of impact basins, this tidal history in rhythmites, this kind of debris in cislunar space. It's also, by default, compatible with established physics, orbital mechanics, conservation of energy, unless there's overwhelming, very expensive reason to start rewriting those. Here's the thing. Some multiple moons ideas have actually grown up. Early on, it was just ancients remembered many moons. Therefore, NASA is hiding them, which is not a model. That's a vibe. But then you get specific proposals. A smaller companion moon forms in the same giant impact or is temporarily captured, then later collides with our moon at low velocity. That collision preferentially thickens the far side crust, giving you the weird near side / far side difference we actually measure in Grail data. That's not just a story. That's a mechanism with geometry, energy budgets, and testable signatures. Notice the foreshadowing move there. The author of that model is essentially saying, if my two moons chapter is true, then in the far side chapter you'd expect extra crust, certain basin patterns, maybe multi-ring structures. Fans meaning actual researchers can then go and check. And when new lunar gravity maps came in, some of those early multiple impact simulations didn't die. They got refined, or ruled out, or split into subcategories. This is normal. This is not a sin. Contrast that with the conspiracy-style version of the same idea, the one where every fossil layer is evidence of a shattered satellite, every myth of darkness is proof of a missing moon, and when tidal rhythmites show a smooth Earth-Moon distance evolution instead of sudden jumps, the theory just adds another invisible moon that left no trace. That's not narrowing the story, that's retrofitting forever in God mode, where nothing can falsify you because you can always invent one more lost rock. And yet, listen to me, Fringe hasn't been useless here. Playing with moonlets, quasi-satellites, and chains of impacts has genuinely enriched mainstream models of early Earth-Moon evolution. Simulations of temporary second moons, resonant companions, and slow mergers help explain old crater timings, the late heavy bombardment structure, even why day length changed the way it did. The community stole the interesting bones of the crazy ideas and rebuilt them with math. So when you hear multiple moons theory, I need you to stop asking, is this fringe? And start asking, what does it predict that could actually fail? Does it bet on a specific crust thickness pattern? On a missing class of impact basins? On a particular age for tidal scars in the rocks? If it never risks being wrong, it's not science, it's fan fiction with better diagrams. Because in the next section, we're going to put that exact pressure on the loudest lost satellite claims. And one of them, annoyingly, comes way closer to passing than you'd expect. So before we drag those loud claims into the interrogation room, we need to do something way less sexy and way more important. We need to stop treating lost satellites as a Netflix conspiracy doc. I need you to hear this clearly. There is no secret lunar Illuminati redacting extra moons from your textbooks. There's a scientific community doing exactly what you would do if you were an overworked grad student with a finite number of simulations. Prioritize the simplest models that actually match the data. Here's the thing. One big impact makes one moon is clean. It's elegant. It explains the tidal rhythmites that show the moon slowly walking away. It fits the chemistry of lunar rocks. It doesn't require you to juggle 5 doomed companion moons and a cosmic insurance policy. So that model gets center stage, not because astronomers are allergic to drama, but because in science, boring and well-supported beats cinematic and hand-wavy every single time. But that doesn't mean the only alternative is tinfoil. The interesting question is not, were there secret moons they're hiding from you? The interesting question is, how messy was Earth's orbital history on the way to this one moon? How many quasi-satellites, captured rubble piles, and short-lived moonlets passed through our gravitational neighborhood? Did any of them leave fingerprints we can still read in the crust, in the tides, in the myths? That's a complexity question, not a cover-up question. And listen to me, because this is where fans of weird cosmology go off the rails. Accepting complexity does not mean rubber stamping every wild story your uncle's YouTube channel throws at you. This is not a sin. This is normal. You can absolutely say, yeah, temporary second moons are plausible in capture and merge models. And in the same breath say, no, that does not mean a crystal death satellite parked over Atlantis last Tuesday. Nuance exists. Use it. So let me reframe our 3 buckets in that light. In the evidence bucket, you've got the serious writing, numerical simulations where companion moons spiral in and splatter, multi-ring impact basins that might hint at more than one big body, tidal records that quietly log the moon's migration. These are the foreshadowing moments of the solar system's story, where the physics itself is intentionally leaving clues. Then there's the retrofits, flood myths mapped onto hypothetical tidal chaos from a decaying moonlet, global darkness legends stapled onto real impact winters. Is some of that pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast energy? Absolutely. But sometimes retrofits are how a community tests whether old stories can be responsibly refiled into a new category of explanation. And finally, mythcraft, two sun legends, twin moon epics, whole religions built on a sky that never existed. That's not fouled astronomy, that's powerful storytelling. It's the human urge to pre-write meaning into the cosmos, whether or not the orbital mechanics would ever sign off on it. Because in the last act, I want to pull those 3 threads together and answer 2 questions as cleanly as we can. What can we actually say about Earth's lost satellites without lying to ourselves? And what deserves to stay where it's strongest? A story, not a science. So we've been dancing around it for 30 sections. So let's just say the quiet part out loud. Did Earth actually ever have a second big moon? I need you to resist the urge to smash that mental debunked or confirmed stamp for a second, because the honest answer is annoying. It's a very qualified yes, sort of, and an even louder no, not the way the community's wildest diagrams draw it. Here's the thing. If you only care about the very early Earth, the yes case is not fringe at all. Run giant impact simulations where a Mars-sized body smashes into proto-Earth, and you don't just get one clean cinematic moon popping out. You get a whole messy debris disk, multiple moonlets coalescing, migrating, interacting, and sometimes merging. In those models, having 2 or 3 substantial companions for a while is not a sin. It's just orbital mechanics doing their chaotic soap opera storytelling. You can even point to specific puzzles. The moon's far side has a thicker crust than the near side. One proposed explanation: a smaller companion moon slowly spirals in and splats onto one hemisphere, plastering it with extra material. That's an intentional testable model, not just some pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast every time 2 craters overlap. So early on, tens of millions of years after formation, a second substantial moonlet hanging around for a bit? Plausible. This is fine. This is normal in that category of planetary formation simulations. But then we hit the no case, and it's brutal for the more romantic versions. If you want a large, long-lived second moon still there in the age of dinosaurs, or worse, hanging in the sky for ancient humans to write poems about, you run into a wall of missing consequences. A big satellite leaves big fingerprints, strong, weird tides, distinct tidal rhythmites in ancient rocks that don't match the clean single moon recession curve we actually measure. Global scale geological stress patterns that scream 2 bodies yanking on the mantle, not one. We also don't see the smoking gun impact scar you'd expect from a late decaying second moon the size these theories love. A moon mass object grazing down into the Roche limit and shredding would be an extinction class event with a very loud stratigraphic signature. The boring single moon models do a suspiciously good job explaining day length changes, orbital evolution, and most of the crater record without needing a secret co-star. And I need you to separate two timelines in your head. Very early, short-lived multi-moon phases, reasonable, even expected. A second big moon hanging around into human history. The thing behind two moons, myths and lost calendars. Extremely unlikely given current evidence. Not impossible in the logical sense, but in the same storytelling category as the author secretly planned everything, when we have notes saying otherwise. So where does that leave us? With a verdict that refuses to be satisfying. A second substantial moon in the deep past is on the table. A civilization-witnessed twin moon is probably not, and we need to be okay living in that ambiguity, because in the next section, I want to show you what happens when we refuse to be okay with it, and start forcing the sky to match the story instead of the other way around. So here's where we zoom out, and I need you to recalibrate your mental image of multiple moons. Not the anime opening with two giant orbs over a ruined city. Not the civilization-witnessed twin lanterns I just told you to be suspicious of. I'm talking about something quieter, messier, and honestly way more probable. A long parade of tiny, forgettable moons that came and went while nobody was around to post about it. Because we already catch them in the act. Right now, in the allegedly boring settled solar system era, we've seen temporary captured objects, so-called mini-moons, dipping in and out of Earth orbit. We've got weird quasi-satellites like 3753 Cruini doing this gravitational tango with us, bound to the sun but in a resonance that makes them our awkward cosmic roommates. And listen to me, if this happens now, in a comparatively clean, low-debris environment, what do you think was going on when everything was dustier and more chaotic? Here's the thing. Early Earth was sitting in a shooting gallery. Way more rocks, way more fragments from collisions, way more chances for the gravity slot machine to pay out a temporary moon. Most of those captures would have been small, tens to hundreds of meters, maybe a few kilometers across. They zip in, they loop around for a while, they get tugged by the sun or nudged by the moon, and then they're out. Or, occasionally, they cash out the hard way and hit us. And those hits, mostly harmless on the global scale. Spectacular regionally, terrible if you're a dinosaur standing in the wrong zip code. But not the kind of thing that leaves a clean, globally diagnostic signature we can point at and go, ah yes, the mini-moon event, Chapter 3, craters erode. Ocean impacts vanish into plate tectonics. Sediment smears everything until it looks the same. The geological record is not a neat bookshelf. It's a landfill. So can we walk up to some random crater and say, with full chest, this was a mini-moon? No, that's the problem. The evidence is statistical, not cinematic. Orbital mechanics tells us captures happen. Population models of near-Earth objects tell us there were more candidates in the past. Put those together, and the reasonable conclusion is that Earth has hosted a ridiculous number of short-lived companions over billions of years. They're just ghosts in the math, not named characters in the story, which reframes multiple moons into something way less fanfic and way more mundane. Not a permanent second lantern that ancient humans carved into every megalith, but a long quiet history of transient satellites flickering in and out of existence while the planet cooled, while the first cells argued about metabolism, while trilobites went to work under a sky that sometimes briefly had more than one bright bead moving through it. This is not a sin, this is normal, and it undercuts the more cinematic Lost Moon narratives in a very annoying way, because the boring version is probably closer to what actually happened. But it also means the one moon classroom diagram is a lie of omission. The Earth system has almost certainly included dozens, maybe hundreds of temporary moons. We just don't get a clean poster of them, which is exactly where a certain corner of the community loses patience with the quiet answer and starts doing something much more dramatic with those craters, those myths, and those missing moons. So here's the uncomfortable question that always shows up at this point. If the Earth system used to be this chaotic multi-moon mess, could anyone have actually seen a different version of it? Did some poor Neolithic farmer look up and go, we used to have two of those? I need you to hold that image in your head while we walk through the timelines, because this is where the romance of the theory slams into the wall of the calendar. Here's the thing, the big moon, the one you and I know, is ancient. We're talking approximately 4 billion years ago, a giant impact, debris disk, then a molten baby moon spiraling outward and settling into a more stable orbit over the next few 100 million years. By the time complex multicellular life is doing anything interesting, the main foreshadowing event is already over. The gun has already gone off. We're just living in the echo. Now drop humanity on that stage. Homo sapiens shows up around 300,000 years ago. Actual complex civilizations, cities, writing, people arguing in clay tablets about grain taxes. That's the last 10,000 years tops. So you've got a moon system whose major mergers and breakups are front-loaded into the first 500 million years. And then you've got us, the late arriving fans, wandering into the theatre in the post-credits scene and trying to reconstruct the whole movie from the popcorn on the floor. Most dynamical models that add extra moons, captured companions, or moon-moon collisions put the serious drama way back at the start. You can have temporary second moons, quasi-satellites, resonant rubble, sure, but big, catastrophic losses of a large companion. Those belong to an Earth that's still mostly magma, not an Earth with Instagram. If a second major moon got shredded or dropped in the last million years, it wouldn't be subtle background storytelling. It would be a global extinction-level plot twist. And this is where we need to be brutally boring for a second. The last million years of Earth history are actually pretty well sampled. Ice cores, ocean sediments, fossil records, volcanic ash layers. These are our sky archives. We see supervolcanoes, we see asteroid impacts, we see climate swings. What we do not see is the unmissable tidal and thermal chaos you'd expect from a large moon suddenly changing orbit or vanishing. No global mega tsunami layer that wraps the planet. No sudden, permanent rewrite of day length buried in tidal rhythmites. If that happened, every geologist would be screaming. Pattern interrupt. This does not mean ancient people only saw a boring sky. Humans have absolutely watched comets shear across the atmosphere, witnessed impacts, lived through volcanic winters and blood-red eclipses. When myths talk about two suns or the day the second moon fell, the more responsible category to put that in is extreme, but natural events, great comets, bolides, dust-choked skies, not a whole extra stable moon that hung around for generations. And listen to me, this is not a sin. Reinterpreting those stories as atmospheric drama instead of literal astrophysics isn't disrespectful, it's just better writing. The storytellers were working with terror and awe, not orbital mechanics textbooks. So yes, humans have seen weird skies. They have seen the Earth system throw tantrums. But the odds that any culture saw a second large moon as a long-term nightly fixture, vanishingly small. The author of the universe had already locked that draft long before we showed up, which sets up the real problem for the multiple moons community. If no one saw them and they vanished before our myths, what kind of evidence can we actually demand next? And here's where I start yelling at our own community a little, because there's a new problem that shows up right here. When we don't have evidence yet, quietly mutates into, it was probably a lost moon anyway. That move, that reflex, that's the thing we need to talk about. Because slapping "it was a lost satellite" onto every weird crater chain and climate wobble is the cosmology version of calling every coincidence in a manga foreshadowing. You see two panels that rhyme and suddenly it's Oda planned it 25 years ago. No, sometimes the author planned it. Sometimes the universe planned it. Sometimes you are a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. And this is not a sin. This is fine. This is normal. Our brains are built to overfit, and the problem is, when that one category crowds out everything else, when mysterious equals second moon becomes the default answer and flattens all the nuance in how the system actually works. Because here's the thing, the real boring-sounding physics is already insane. Tidal locking is the reason the moon keeps one face toward us. But it's not just a trivia fact. It's a multi-billion-year torque war between Earth's spin and lunar orbit, recorded in tidal rhythmites that literally fossilize shorter ancient days. Orbital resonances herd asteroids into quasi-moon status. 3753 Crudinae does this bizarre horseshoe dance around our orbit. Axial precession slowly drags our spin axis in a 26,000-year circle, quietly retiming eclipse seasons and reshuffling which stars host the solstices. That choreography is cooler on a craft level than just there was another rock up there. When we insist on a dramatic vanished satellite every time, we miss the quieter, weirder questions. How many mini-moons are we capturing and losing all the time in temporary orbits? How many early moonlets merged in slow-motion demolition derbies before we ended up with the current moon? How much of Earth's early crust was written by those phases rather than one single Hollywood impact? Those are not as cinematic as Secret Second Moon erased from history, but they are where the actual story is being written. And while we're busy headcanoning lost moons into every gap, the real universe is speedrunning past our sci-fi expectations anyway. We've already found exoplanet systems with tightly packed planets, potential moon-hosting giants, and ring structures so wide they would dwarf our entire sky. Saturn's rings have kinky, twisted waves from shepherd moons. Some exoplanet rings might be proto-moons mid-formation. None of that needs a conspiratorial twist. It just needs you to pay attention to what's actually there. So I need you to shift the internal question from, I want this to be true, to, I want to understand what is actually weird here. One is fragile. It shatters the second a simulation says no, that orbit decays in 1,000,000 years. The other is sustainable wonder. It survives being wrong about the specific explanation because the ore is hooked to the process, not the headcanon. And if we can hold that mindset, then when we do see a pattern that really does demand another body in the sky, we'll recognize it. Which raises the next issue. What would evidence for a truly lost moon even look like in practice, and how do we keep that bar high without killing the fun? So here's where we need to talk about self-preservation. You can be absolutely fascinated by lost satellites and still not want to sound like your uncle who discovered secret NASA footage on a Facebook reel at 3 a.m. The trick is framing. Start in boring territory on purpose. Lead with the stuff every planetary scientist has had beaten into their skull. The giant impact model, the hot debris disk around early Earth, the fact that simulations routinely spit out short-lived companion moons that merge or fall back. Mention temporary captures, quasi-satellites, 3,753 Cruise doing its weird horseshoe dance. When you open with mainstream physics, you're not hiding the fun. You're proving you know where the guardrails are before you start bouncing off them. Then, label your thoughts. Aggressively. And here's the thing. The same way we separated foreshadowing from coincidence and retrofit, you need categories in your moon discourse. Say this part is supported by simulations when you're talking about multi-moon outcomes in impact models. Say this is a plausible extrapolation when you jump from tidal rhythmites and impact basins to maybe an extra body was in a decaying orbit here. And then very clearly, this is mythic or metaphorical but fun to think about when you bring in two-moon myths or megalithic alignments. That last category is not a sin. This is not bad thinking. This is in fact how most humans have always processed the sky. If you don't label, everything blurs. And once everything blurs, you've basically volunteered to be in the same category as the moon is a hologram threads. I need you to avoid that timeline. Next, overclaims. Do not post "Science proves Earth had many moons" unless you are actively speedrunning losing credibility. Say some models suggest early companion moons that might help explain certain lunar features, and then point to an example, a paper on a two-stage merger explaining the far side highlands, or work on doublet craters that could maybe hint at fragmented secondaries. Vibes get you muted. And listen to me, you have to link things. Not other people's breathless YouTube thumbnails. Actual papers, or at least reputable summaries, NASA pages on capture dynamics, review articles on lunar formation, skeptical breakdowns of multiple moon claims. When you do that, you're signaling, I read the homework, I'm still speculating, but I know what I'm speculating on. That moves you from conspiracy tier to curious nerd who can be invited to seminars without causing a scene. The meta goal here is status. You want to be in the in-group, the part of the community that can enjoy weird storytelling about Earth's past sky while still respecting evidence and authorship of the data. You can say, this flood myth feels foreshadowing-ish for an impact event, and also, in the same breath, this is normal pattern-seeking monkey brain, and we might be seeing Jesus in toast. Both can be true. This is fine. Because once you're fluent in that tone, you can ask a much sharper question without sounding unhinged. If we did have a lost moon, where would its body be now, and what scars should we be able to point at on Earth and the moon to prove it? So here's where this stops being purely Jesus in toast and starts being testable. We're not stuck forever in vibe land. We're about to hit an era where you can point at a seismogram or a gravity map and say, no, that's wrong, or, oh wait, that's actually a scar from something huge. I need you to appreciate how rare that is for a theory this weird every single week. Start with the moon itself. Over the next couple of decades, we're getting an armada, more orbiters, more landers, and, crucially, serious talk of a far-side seismology network. Not just one lonely Apollo seismometer on the near side, but a whole grid of instruments listening to moonquakes through the entire body. If there really was a companion moon that pancaked onto one hemisphere, you'd expect asymmetries in crust thickness, fracture zones, buried basins. Seismology is brutally honest. It will tell us whether the far side is just ugly by chance or structurally mangled in a way that screams merger. On top of that, improved gravity mapping, better than Grail, higher resolution, tighter error bars can hunt for density anomalies. Here's the thing. A slow, low-angle moon-moon collision should leave weird blobs of denser material, half-erased basins, gravitational mascons that don't line up with any visible crater. If we map the moon in enough detail, and it's smooth under the hood, that quietly murders some of the more dramatic lost satellite scenarios. If instead we find a Frankenstein patchwork where the far side highlands sit on top of something denser and off-center, the companion moon hypothesis suddenly graduates from fun fanfic to annoyingly plausible. But we don't just stare upward. Earth is a snitch. Higher resolution measurements of tides and tiny rotational wobbles, better dating of ancient impact structures, and expanded surveys for temporary minimoons in Earth orbit all feed into this. Tidal rhythmites in billion-year-old rocks already record how far the moon used to be and how fast we were spinning. If future data show abrupt jumps instead of a smooth spiral out, that's a huge problem for the simplest one-moon story. This is not a sin. This is how science works. You think you had one clean orbiting companion, and the fossil record taps you on the shoulder and goes, actually, about that, pattern interrupt, zoom out. Forget Earth. Think exoplanets. We're starting to get good enough at transit timing and direct imaging that detecting multi-moon systems around other worlds is no longer pure science fiction. If we find that Earth-sized planets almost always grow little moon swarms, and those swarms often merge or crash over time, then the multiple early Earth moons category stops being special pleading and becomes the default. If, on the other hand, stable single moon setups dominate, the burden of proof on Lost Moon fans gets heavier. Listen to me. This is not a closed case. The next few decades are basically the part of the story where the author finally starts cashing in or killing off long-teased foreshadowing. Some lost satellite ideas will get ruled out hard, some will hang on, and a few might jump categories, from fringe speculation into, you actually have to address this in serious writing about lunar history. Which means we need to be ready for a much more uncomfortable possibility. What if the scars point to something stranger than any of the current models are willing to admit? So, before we disappear completely into the pattern-seeking monkey jungle and start seeing Jesus in every crater, we need to do an autopsy recap. What actually survived all of this? What's real signal? And what's just our brains speedrunning Mythcraft on hard mode? Remember the 3 buckets. Evidence. That's the stuff where physics, geology, and orbital mechanics are all standing in the same room, nodding. The emblem here is that companion moon crust model. Early Earth with a smaller proto-moon parked in a weird orbit, slowly spiraling in and splatting onto the far side to help build that thicker lunar crust. Simulations, density data, impact history. This lives in the, you actually have to deal with this in serious writing category. Second bucket, retrofitting. That's when we grab something real and then stretch it on the conspiracy rack until it confesses. Bud myths are the mascot here. Yes, huge tides and impacts can drown coastlines. Yes, some rhythmites and crater dates line up eerily with cultural collapse. But turning every deluge story into, clearly the night the second moon shattered, is us doing fanfic geology. This is not a sin. This is fine. It's just not hard proof. Third bucket. Mythcraft. That's where we go full speculative author, treating stories as if they're peer-reviewed data. 2 sun and 2 moon legends, the sky went wrong motifs in Mesopotamia or Mesoamerica, Fantastic storytelling fuel. But once you check against actual celestial mechanics, most of them cannot be literal eyewitness accounts of a big, long-lived second moon hanging up there during human history. They're metaphor, theology, or at best very noisy echoes of real disasters. So what made it through the grinder? First conclusion. Early multi-moon phases are absolutely on the table. Capture and merge models basically demand a chaotic youth where Earth had temporary second moons, Trojan clumps, quasi-satellites in weird resonances. Short-lived companion moons, tens of thousands, maybe millions of years, are not fringe, they're baked into the math. Second conclusion. A long-lived second big moon during anything you'd call history is extremely unlikely. If a Ganymede-sized roommate had been up there while humans were building megaliths and writing epics, it would have wrecked the tides, scarred the crust, and left a smoking gun in the rhythmites. We don't see that. The absence of evidence here really does behave like evidence of absence. Third conclusion. Mini-moons are basically canon. We already have objects doing weird near-Earth dances. Truth me, temporary captures, stuff slipping in and out of hill stability. But most of those are so small and so brief that geology never notices. They're foreshadowing for orbital chaos, not co-authors of the fossil record. Which brings us back to the uncomfortable bit. Most popular lost moon claims. They live in retrofitting and mythcraft. Fun to explore, great for the community's storytelling instincts, but not currently supported by hard data. And here's the thing. That doesn't make the real story boring. Even without a dramatic second moon exploding in front of Sumerian farmers, Earth's orbital history is way richer than the kindergarten one moon forever version. I need you to sit with that for a second, because the heavy analysis is done. We've sorted the categories. We've drawn the line between what's planned by physics and what's projected by fans. Next, I want to zoom out, talk about why we keep inventing lost satellites anyway, and what that says about how we tell stories about the sky and about ourselves. So here's where we need to be very clear. This is not a video about moon count trivia. I don't care if the scoreboard says 1 moon, 2 moons, or it's complicated with a footnote. The real question is what you do as a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast when the sky gives you incomplete data and a really seductive story to plug the gaps. As the multiple moons thing is just one category of the same problem. You've seen this movie before. Ancient civilizations, same dynamic. Pointed at a solstice, notices a myth about 2 suns or 2 moons, and suddenly we're off to the races with an intentional lost technology civilization that knew secret orbital mechanics. Climate events? Same. A flood layer, a volcanic winter, a few darkness myths, and boom, it must have been a shattered satellite raining fire. Listen to me, this is not a sin. Wanting a big, dramatic author behind the universe's plot is normal. This is fine. But here's the thing. When you treat every crater, every tidal rhythmic layer, every double ring basin as foreshadowing for a hidden moon, you stop letting the evidence tell you what story it actually supports. You start retrofitting. And that retrofit impulse is everywhere. Media theories, we do the exact same storytelling dance. A show hints at a shadow organization, drops a few vague symbols, production gets messy, and then fans stitch the whole mess into a 20-year master plan. Sometimes the author really did plan it. Sometimes the author is just scrambling and the community is doing unpaid script doctor work. With lost satellites, the emotional appeal is obvious. What if the sky you see every night is missing half its history? That hits. It makes the universe feel conspiratorial, as if there's an editor in the cosmos redacting chapters. That feeling can be motivating. It gets you digging through capture and merge models, through quasi-satellites such as Croatan, through fossil records of day length, but it can also be deeply misleading, because the drama of erased moons will always outcompete the boring stability of orbital mechanics in your head. So I need you to flip the goal. The win condition here is not landing on a smug yes or no about extra moons. The win condition is learning to enjoy the process, reading the dry papers, checking whether a proposed breakup event matches known impact ages, asking whether a myth is independent data or just a poetic echo, classifying claims, reporting this is planned by physics from this is projected by fans. Once you reframe it that way, multiple moons stops being a verdict and becomes a training arc for practicing how to hold curiosity and skepticism in the same hand without crushing either. And that's going to matter a lot more in the next section, when we stop talking about hypothetical rocks in the sky and start talking about what you, personally, are going to do with all of this. Because I'm not ending this with a tidy answer. I'm ending it with an invitation and the uncomfortable question that comes with it. So here's the uncomfortable question. Now that you've heard the case, what are you actually going to do with it? Not in a cosmic change your life way. I mean in the very petty, very YouTube way of, what are you typing in the comments after this? I need you to pick a side on the evidence. Tell me which piece of "we had extra moons" foreshadowing felt the most convincing, and which one felt like a pattern-seeking monkey seeing Jesus in toast. Was it the tidal rhythmites quietly recording a different Earth-Moon distance that sold you? The doublet impact basins that scream more than one culprit? Or was that the stretch? And the real problem for you was me taking Mesopotamian two moons myths seriously for more than 5 seconds. Argue it. Call it nonsense if you want. But if you're going to swing, bring receipts, papers, datasets, translations, not just vibes. Because here's the thing. This only works if the community treats this as a stress test, not a sermon. I'm not the author of reality. I'm one nerd doing long-form storytelling about rocks in the sky. If you think I misread an orbital mechanics paper, I want the paragraph and the figure number. If you think I gave a free pass to a geological oddity that has a boring mainstream explanation, I want that too. This is not a sin. This is normal. This is how we keep the intentional evidence separate from the retrofitted headcanon. Second job. I need you to feed me your weirdest stuff. Obscure myths where the sky has 2 or 3 bright companions, petroglyphs that sure do not look like a single round moon. Geological scars in your local region that old-timers swear came from the second moon falling. Dump them in the comments or on the Discord if you're allergic to public threads. I'm going to do a follow-up video where we classify and dissect the best examples using the same 3-bucket framework: planned, retrofit, coincidence. Your finds become the syllabus. Pattern interrupt. Do not just send me anything circular and call it a moon. Your cousin's blurry phone shot of a street lamp through fog is not a lost satellite. This is fine. We need standards. Third job. Weaponize the share button. Send this specifically to 2 categories of people: the friend who loves wild space theories and the friend who is a hardcore skeptic who sighs when you say alternative cosmology. Brain mind known. Frame it as a stress test for both mindsets. Can the conspiracy brain survive contact with tidal physics? Can the rationalist brain stay open when multiple cultures draw the same impossible sky? And then try the framework elsewhere. Next time you're in a media theory rabbit hole, arguing about whether an author always planned that twist, run the 3 buckets. What was clearly intentional from the start, what was probably retrofitting, what's just coincidence we're overfitting. Same with history debates, same with every hidden pattern thread. You get to enjoy the foreshadowing without surrendering your brain. We've spent over 2 hours talking about moons. Listen to me. If you're still here, you are now officially part of the lost satellites. You're the extra moon history forgot to log, and I'm absolutely dragging you with me into the next chapter. So since you're now an honorary lost satellite, we need to talk about the fake cousins trying to crash the family reunion. Because every time the multiple moons theory pokes its head into the mainstream, there's a wave of headlines screaming, "Astronomers discover Earth's second moon." And 9 times out of 10, they're talking about 3,753 Cruitus. Sidely is the poster child for this problem. It's not a moon, it's a quasi-satellite in a 1-1 resonance with Earth. That means it orbits the Sun in roughly the same period we do, but it is not gravitationally bound to Earth as a satellite. The Earth isn't its primary. The Sun is. If you plotted Cruitney from the Sun's point of view, it's just another slightly weird near-Earth asteroid doing its thing. But here's the thing. If you plot Cruitney from Earth's frame, over years it traces out this enormous looping horseshoe path. So if you're a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast, your brain goes, "Oh, it's going round us." Moon. This is not a sin. This is normal. Our intuition about orbits is terrible, and orbital mechanics is aggressively non-intuitive. I need you to picture two doodles. First doodle, a small circle going around a big circle. That is a true moon, gravitationally bound, closed orbit around the planet every single week. Second doodle, two circles going around an even bigger circle in roughly the same track. Sometimes one is ahead, sometimes behind, sometimes they swap places. That's a resonance. That's cruitiny. It's sharing an orbital period with us around the sun. That is a completely different category of relationship. And yet, for years, headlines have happily called cruity Earth's second moon, as if NASA just stumbled over a secret Death Star hiding behind the main one. Fans read that, the community repeats it, and suddenly your uncle is at Thanksgiving explaining how astronomers covered up an extra moon for decades. No one mentions the words quasi-satellite, resonance, or reference frame. The nuance gets deleted in the edit. Why does this matter for our lost satellite story? Because sloppy language around pseudo-moons poisons the well. If every quasi-satellite, co-orbital, or resonant rock gets marketed as a new moon, then when we talk about real temporary captures or serious simulations of past multiple moon configurations, it all sounds like the same clickbait nonsense. Listen to me. Being precise here is not gatekeeping, it's survival. If you want to have an adult conversation about whether Earth once had two true-bound moons that later merged or crashed, you cannot put cruity in the same mental folder. That's mixing, foreshadowing with coincidence, and then yelling that the author planned everything. It flattens the storytelling. The next time you see, "We found a new moon," I need you to pause. Ask, is this object actually bound to Earth, or is it just sharing our year around the sun? Is it temporary capture, stable satellite, or just a resonant hitchhiker? Until you can answer that, it doesn't go in the Lost Moons file. It goes in the media got horny for headlines again file. And once we clean that up, then we can finally talk about the objects that really do blur the line. The temporary moons that come and go, and the geological scars they might have left behind. And here's where the real problem starts. Because once you admit temporary moons are a thing, you run headfirst into a different kind of gravity well. Marketing. I need you to picture a standard classroom diagram for a second. You know the one. Blue marble, one grey moon, both in perfect circles, everything color-coded and smug. That diagram is not a model of reality. That diagram is a PowerPoint pitch deck. It's one planet, one moon. No one asks follow-up questions, because that's easier to teach, easier to memorize, easier to test. And this is not a sin. This is fine. This is normal. You cannot drop full n-body chaos into a middle school worksheet and expect anything except tears and broken calculators. So the educational system does what any overworked author does under deadline. It cuts subplots. No quasi-satellites, no temporary captures, no probability distributions. In cast list, one protagonist moon. But here's the thing. When every textbook, every planetarium show, every children's documentary keeps hammering that same static image, it doesn't just simplify, it foreshadows what you're allowed to think later. It quietly trains your brain to file multiple moons into the fringe category. So when someone says, hey, Earth might have had other short-lived satellites during formation, your pattern-seeking monkey brain doesn't go, oh, interesting parameter space. It goes, conspiracy guy with the red string. Planetariums are even more ruthless. You've got 40 minutes, a star dome, and a bus full of exhausted teachers. Are you going to explain temporary captures, orbital resonances, and tidal rhythmites as a continuous record of Earth-Moon distance? Or are you going to spin a pretty sky, do one neat eclipse demo, and sell everyone a glow-in-the-dark postcard on the way out? The show has to be legible from the back row. Messy orbital histories are not back row friendly. Media then takes that already sanitized picture and runs it through another filter. Drama. You don't get simulations suggest a non-zero probability that Earth temporarily hosted additional satellites during accretion. You get, did Earth once have two moons? Scientists baffled. Followed 3 months later by, no, Earth never had two moons, says new study. Binary story. On or off. Moon or no moon. Theory is either a shocking revelation or total nonsense. There is no category for Some variants are plausible within error bars, others are garbage, and the rest are interesting but underdetermined. And that marketing bias doesn't just shape the community's vibes, it nudges the science itself. If your grant proposal is, I want to explore a huge messy parameter space of transient Earth satellites and see which ones leave subtle geological fingerprints, that's a harder sell than, I will test whether Earth had a secret second moon, yes or no. The first is careful storytelling. The second is a thumbnail. So the multiple moons theory ends up as roadkill between those two trucks. The cartoon version, Crystal Cities on Vanished Moons, Ancient Myths as Literal Sky Diaries, gets all the attention. The reasonable version, Capture and Merge Scenarios, Doublet Impact Basins, Quasi-Moons in Resonant Orbits, doesn't fit into a clean soundbite. Fans only ever see the extremes, obviously true or obviously crackpot. The middle, where the genuinely interesting questions live, becomes invisible, which is exactly why when we finally talk about the geological scars and fossil clocks that might remember lost satellites, you're going to feel that same whiplash, and I need you to pay attention to what your brain does next. So here's the thing your brain is about to do. We talk about geological scars. You imagine a clean medical chart for Earth, every impact logged, every crater labelled, every weird line on a map pointing straight at a missing moon. And I need you to understand that this fantasy record, it does not exist. Because Earth is not a museum. Earth is a paper shredder with oceans. Plate tectonics takes the majority of the planet's surface and runs it through a recycling program on a few 100 million-year loop. Oceanic crust dives back into the mantle at subduction zones, melts, and comes up somewhere else as new rock. So if a lost satellite spiraled in and dropped a cluster of impacts into the Pacific 800 million years ago, most of those craters are not hidden. They are literally gone, deleted, overwritten by new seafloor before mammals were even a draft in the evolutionary outline. Meanwhile, continents are not exactly neat archivists either. Erosion, sedimentation, metamorphism, this is the editorial department from hell. Old surfaces get scraped off by ice and wind, then buried under kilometers of younger sediment, then cooked and folded until your nice circular basin is a weird squiggly pattern that only shows up as a gravity anomaly on a survey map. We get a few stubborn cratons that keep their scars, but it's a brutally biased sample. It's the equivalent of judging an author's entire career from 3 surviving pages and a grocery list. And remember, even our control group, the moon, is not a perfect control. Yes, it preserves a much better impact record because it doesn't have weather or plate tectonics. This is why fans of the multiple moons idea keep pointing at multi-ring basins and doublet craters as their favorite foreshadowing. But even there, space weathering darkens and blurs old surfaces, and newer impacts slam directly on top of older ones. It's stratigraphy by sledgehammer. You can say something violent happened early, but resolving whether that something was 1 moon, 2 moons, or a doomed temporary capture, that's a different category of difficulty. So where does that leave us? In a very annoying middle. On one hand, the gaps in the record mean we cannot stand up and confidently declare no extra moons ever, case closed. The data just isn't that clean. On the other hand, those same gaps are not a blank check for us to turn every crater into a planned satellite breakup. Missing evidence cuts both ways. It protects modest, boring scenarios, and it limits how wild we can get with the speculative stuff. Listen to me. Uncertainty is not the same thing as freedom. Uncertainty is a fenced playground. Within that fence, some lost satellite stories are more compatible with what we don't see than others, and we need to stay honest about which is which. And if your conspiracy brain is revving up right now, good, because next we're going to test exactly how far you can push a missing moon story before the rocks start pushing back. So if the rocks are going to push back, we need to see what they've already done to everyone else. Because here's the thing, Earth is not the main character of the solar system. We are the weird, minimalist apartment in a neighborhood of hoarders whose yards are overflowing with moons. Start with Jupiter. 4 Galilean moons, each so big and bright you could run an entire documentary series on just one. Io is being kneaded by tides into a volcanic stress ball. Europa's ice shelf flexes and cracks. Ganymede and Callisto carry the scars of ancient collisions. That's not a static satellite family. That's a group chat, where tidal forces and orbital resonances are constantly yelling at each other. Then Saturn strolls in with dozens of moons plus rings, which are basically a shredded moon in progress. That is the foreshadowing baked right into the sky. Big planets do not keep their moons pristine. Move outward and it gets messier. Uranus and Neptune have these swarms of irregular satellites, small dark objects on tilted, elongated, sometimes retrograde orbits. They're not neat little children born in a disk. They're adopted chaos gremlins. Capture is not a fringe headcanon here. It's the default explanation. Something wandered too close, lost energy through three-body interactions, and got stuck. This is normal. This is fine. The community of outer planet moons is basically a support group for former asteroids. Even Mars, our scrawny neighbour, ended up with Phobos and Deimos, two lumpy, probably captured bodies that are now being slowly torn apart by tides. Phobos is literally spiralling inward to its death. Give it tens of millions of years and you either get a ring or a debris event. So when fans treat a moon got captured and later destroyed as some wild conspiracy category of storytelling, I need you to remember that Mars is doing that arc right now in slow motion, and these systems evolve. Collisions shatter moons into families of fragments. Tidal interactions pump or drain orbital energy until something migrates, locks into resonance, or crosses a Roche limit and explodes. We can trace whole histories, shattered progenitor moons at Saturn, possible past collisions in the Jovian system, irregulars at Uranus that were almost certainly grabbed late. None of this is hypothetical. It's literally orbital forensics. That means. So listen to me. When you propose that Earth might have temporarily hosted an extra moon, or captured a small body that later crashed or escaped, you are not inventing a special category of physics. You are asking whether a very common solar system behavior ever visited our neighborhood. Earth is smaller than Jupiter, sure. Different position, sure. But the author of this planetary story clearly has a few favorite tricks, and captured or lost moons are one of them. The problem isn't, could this ever happen? The problem is how much of that drama could happen here without leaving fingerprints we've already seen. And that's where we go next. Turning those comparative patterns into hard constraints on any lost satellite story you want to write for Earth. When we start turning those comparative patterns into hard constraints, we run into a different problem: emotional orbital mechanics. Not could a moon be captured, but could you handle watching it leave? Because the moon is not just a rock up there, it's a prop in the story you think you're living. Here's the thing: for most of human history, that one pale disk has been our gold standard for reliability. It waxes, it wanes, it drags the tides around. It shows up in every poem where someone's trying to be deep at 3 a.m. It's our built-in calendar, our default wallpaper for romance, our cultural shorthand for cycles and return. So when you tell people, oh, by the way, maybe there used to be 3 of those and they crashed or wandered off, you're not just proposing a new orbital solution. You're poking the comfort animal of the sky with a stick. A finished sky with fixed stars and one moon sells a very flattering story. It feels planned. It feels intentional. The author of the universe wrote Act 1, locked the script, and now we're just performing it under this perfectly arranged dome. That's a cozy category to live in. There's one spotlight, one familiar face overhead, and it's been there for Grandma, and for you, and for whatever poor soul is doom-scrolling under it in 2300. An evolving sky is meaner. A sky where moons get captured, shredded into rings, and ground back into meteor showers is a sky that doesn't care about your narratives. It's not foreshadowing anything for your benefit. It's just doing orbital slapstick on geological timescales. And I need you to notice how fast some fans flinch when you suggest that. Because if the heavens can recast major characters mid-series, what else in the story is negotiable? But then you have the other camp in the community, the people who hear lost satellites and go, oh, so there's lore. For them, extra moons are not a problem. They're bonus DLC. The idea that Earth once had a second companion that spiraled in, raised insane tides, triggered extinctions and then smeared itself into a crater chain, that's appealing precisely because it means the sky has secret chapters. The constancy was the retrofit. The real writing was messy. And this maps cleanly onto how people react to deep time, mass extinctions, and climate change. Some of us want stability myths. The climate has always cycled. Species come and go. This is fine. This is normal. The author knows what he's doing. Others are willing to stare at the fossil record, see entire faunas erased by dumb luck and physics, and accept that the script is being revised in real time, often by us. Growing up scientifically and philosophically is getting comfortable with an unfinished sky. We need to stop demanding that the cosmos foreshadow on our schedule and start asking what the evidence actually supports, even when it kills the romance. And listen to me, that doesn't make the story worse. It just makes it less about you, which raises the uncomfortable question we have to tackle next. If we drop the comfort filter and treat Earth as just another chaotic system, how many lost moons can we actually smuggle through the physics before the evidence catches us lying? So we need to do a tiny bit of mental renovation. Not a full teardown of your cosmic house, just repaint the diagram you've been carrying around since 3rd grade. Because that picture of a baby Earth with one perfect moon snapping into place and then politely staying there forever, that's the cartoon. That's the mascot version of the story, not the actual story. Here's the thing. The parts we're really sure about are already chaotic. Giant impact? Very strongly supported. Early debris disk? Also very strongly supported. You smack a Mars-sized object into proto-Earth, you don't get a single marble gently parking in orbit. You get a roiling disk of molten rock, vapor and junk, and out of that mess multiple clumps can form. Moonlets. Proto-moons. A whole cursed gachapul of satellites. Now, do we know there were exactly 3 of them, and 1 survived, and 2 did a dramatic Thelma and Louise into the Pacific? No, that's the speculative part. The specific headcount and lifespans of those early companions are where the evidence turns into vibes. But the general category of there were probably several moon-sized or moonlet-sized objects in weird orbits for a while is not fringe. That's just what M-body simulations spit out when you ask physics to do its job. So I need you to swap the static poster in your head for a time-lapse. Don't see one moon hanging there eternally. See orbits migrating. See small companions spiring in and splashing down as impact basins. See others getting ejected into solar orbit to become anonymous near-Earth objects. You already live in a world where we have quasi-satellites, temporary captures, and resonant weirdos like 3753 Cruet doing a gravitational tango with Earth. Add that energy to the past, then crank the chaos slider to 11. Pattern interrupt. At no point in this model do we need a dramatic, fully formed second moon cruising overhead in the age of dinosaurs while humans write poems about it. You can keep your sanity. This is not a sin against wonder. This is just refusing to handwave orbital mechanics. The safe, boring, brutally honest version is this. Early on, Earth probably had a swarm of short-lived companions birthed from the same impact that made the moon. Over tens of millions of years, those merged, crashed or escaped, leaving one dominant moon and every so often a tiny captured side character. That fits mainstream physics. It also quietly covers the most plausible multiple moon scenarios without promising a missing Death Star that should have left a geological confession letter. And listen to me. When you think about Earth's history from now on, I want you to consciously ditch the one moon forever diagram. Replace it with this more dynamic reel of moons flickering in and out, foreshadowing the stable configuration we inherited. Because once that new picture is in your head, the next step is to ask a much sharper question. If that's our baseline chaos, how far can the lost satellite storytellers actually push it before the rock record slams the door? So here's where I need you to do the annoying grown-up thing. We've taken the tour, we've poked the craters, we've yelled at ancient myths, and now we actually have to sort this mess into piles. Not the fun, what if there were 3 giant moons over Atlantis last Tuesday pile. The defensible pile. Here's the thing. The strongest, most boringly credible version of the multiple moons theory is also the least cinematic. It's the early, mostly unobserved companion moonlets and the transient mini-moons, the stuff that lives in simulations and dynamical models, not in Babylonian fan art. You run the giant impact math, you get debris. You let that debris orbit, you get clumps. Some merge into the moon, some get stripped away, some exist for a few million years and then die quietly. That's not wild fan fiction. That's just orbital mechanics doing slow, patient storytelling. Same with the modern mini-moons. We already have quasi-satellites. We already have captured rocks that hang around for a few orbits and then bail. Those are tiny, granted, but they prove the category. A second potato-sized moon that nobody in Mesopotamia wrote poetry about? Totally fine. This is normal. And there's the grey zone. The spicy middle. Companion moon collision models for the lunar farside crust, for example. You take the moon we know, bolt on a smaller sibling and a Trojan point, let them gravitationally bicker for a while, then eventually smear the extra one across the far side to explain that weird thick crust. It's elegant, it solves a real problem. It also has not cleared the everyone in the community agrees bar. Different simulations disagree, the rock record is noisy, and the author here is nature, not some manga genius we can interview. So it sits in the active research bucket. Intriguing, not confirmed, not fanon. And then we have the stuff we need to stop pretending is on the same level. Recent lost moons causing global floods in the last 10,000 years. Multiple large moons hanging in the sky during recorded history with zero unambiguous depictions. Zero tidal rhythmites screaming, "Hey, Earth went chaos mode." Conspiracies where NASA and every geologist on Earth are hiding obvious evidence of vanished megamoons. No. The rock record, the fossil day-length data, the impact chronology, all of it folds in on those claims until they suffocate. You don't get a moon-sized object dropping in, wrecking the oceans, and then leaving no clean global stratigraphic scar. This is not a sin, by the way, to have believed the dramatic version. You're a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. I am too. This is fine. But we need to graduate from cool YouTube infographic to does this survive contact with geology? If it doesn't, it goes in the story fuel pile, not the evidence pile. And all of this is provisional. Tomorrow, someone could pull a new lunar sample that quietly moves an idea from grey zone to solid, or from spicy to dead. But any new claim still has to run the same gauntlet. Does the physics work? Does the timeline work? Or are we just retrofitting myths because the vibes are strong? And if you can hold that nuance, early moonlets and mini-moons in, conspiracy megamoons out, weird collision models on probation, that's an intellectual flex. You're resisting the urge to debunk everything on sight, and you're resisting the urge to believe the most theatrical version just because it's fun. And once you can do that, we can finally turn to the really uncomfortable question. If the sky's history is this messy, what does that do to all those flood stories and world-age myths we keep waving around as evidence? Which means if you're still here, 2 hours later, staring at diagrams of tidal rhythmites and arguing with me in your head about Mesopotamian flood narratives, congratulations. You are, and I say this with affection, a certified moon nerd. Every single week, you could have watched a 10-minute conspiracy edit with ominous drums and JPEGs of Sumerian tablets. Instead, you sat through orbital mechanics, capture and merge models, and me telling you that your favourite apocalypse myth probably isn't a GoPro recording of the late heavy bombardment. This is not a normal way to spend your free time. This is fine. This is our problem. Here's the thing. Videos this long, this receipt heavy, do not survive on accident. The algorithm is not out here going, "Ah yes, nuanced discussions of quasi-satellites and rotational wobbles, push that to the front." If you want more of this category of content, I need you to actually do the boring ritual dance. Subscribe, hit the button, click the thumbs, throw it in a group chat with the one friend who also stares at the sky and thinks that's probably wrong, because what you just watched is planned. I don't mean scripted in the sense of every joke landing. You've heard enough of my failed metaphors to know that's not true. I mean intentional in the sense that we are trying to build a tiny community of people who care whether an author is foreshadowing a real second moon or just riffing on a cool myth they half remember from a documentary. Oh, comments. We need to talk in there. I asked you earlier, and I'm asking again, what was the most convincing piece of evidence for multiple moons for you? Was it the tidal rhythmites telling us the day used to be shorter? The weird doublet craters that feel suspiciously third body, or the way flood myths cluster around known impact windows? Then, what was the biggest stretch where you went, okay, no, that's the pattern-seeking monkey seeing Jesus in toast? Put that down. Draw the line. That's how you get better at this kind of storytelling autopsy. And then, nominate things. Which myths, Which geological oddities, which two suns, two moons traditions do you want on the slab for a future myth autopsy episode? I'm absolutely down to do a follow-up that's just mini-moons and quasi-satellites, or an episode on how other planets' moon systems evolve, and what that would do to a civilization's sky stories. If you want a community-submitted case file episode, where I go through your pet hypotheses and sort them into foreshadowing, retrofit, or pure fanfic, say so. Listen to me. We started this whole thing with a simple complaint. I said we need to have a conversation about the sky we think we know because the picture in your head was probably wrong. After all this, your internal sky diagram is still wrong. It's just less wrong. You've got extra layers now. Temporary second moons, lost satellites, impact scars, cultural echoes. And if that upgraded, slightly more accurate wrongness feels good, hit the buttons, join the community, and we'll keep chipping away at the rest of the sky together.